Hello, everybody, and welcome to XB2+1, your guest show for the Xbox 2 podcast. I am joined, as usual, by my co-host with the co-most, my good buddy Randall Thor19. Say hello, Rand.
What's going on, Jez?
Yeah.
Hope you're
Right.
doing well. I know you're having a bug issue over there, not only with bugs flying around in your face, but also with bug spray ended up in your mouth.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah, I
double
apologize.
whammy.
Yeah, double whammy. I apologize to everyone if my voice sounds particularly bad. I might also periodically mute my mic so I can cough because I inhaled a ton of citronella-based bug spray a little while ago, and now my throat is absolutely destroyed. But we get a little bit better every day. But anyways, forget about that. That's unimportant. This week we are joined by most illustrious guest who's been on the show once before. Was it a year ago? 2 years
Yes.
ago now? But yeah, we are joined by Colin Moriarty of Sacred Symbols and Last Stand Media. Hi there, Colin. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you guys for having me. Good to be with you. I would say good to see you, but you guys don't do cameras. It's a little. I'm not used to podcasting like this, so I'm sorry if you get the social cues of everyone about when they're done talking, when they're about to say something, if they have a point to make or whatever. So hopefully, I'm not too annoying and overstepping anyone.
Oh,
we always
I get
find
that.
it people come on that are used to cameras and they find the whole no camera thing a little like pretty chill because you can just do whatever you want because you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, it's kind of nice.
Yeah, Rand's always, munching on some snacks while we podcast.
No, that's not true. I stopped doing that during the show because I've been trying to lose weight and I think I've lost like 80 pounds. So
really, that's awesome.
Slowly but surely.
Yeah, 80 pounds.
Congratulations.
That's crazy.
80 pounds is a lot, dude.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to lose. Yeah. So
fair enough. Yeah, I guess I don't know what you look like. Come to think of it.
Well, I mean, there is. I did have my picture. I had a pinned tweet from when I broke a million gamer score at E3 with Xbox.
Oh, okay.
Phil Spencer.
Wow, you broke a million gamer score? Jesus Christ, that's huge.
Yeah, I was like the fifth person in the world to do it.
Wow.
And then they invited me out there to break it on stage during Inside Xbox. So that was pretty amazing. I got to live the dream of going to E3 because that was back when E3 was still exclusive to just kind of press and industry.
Right. Yeah.
But I was able to go and live the dream of experiencing E3, and then so I was like, all right, this is super cool. So
that's awesome. I had no idea. That's cool. Yeah, E3 is cool for about 5 minutes, but when you have to work it. But I'm so glad it's done. I hated going to E3 personally. But that's pretty cool. I wonder how many. Is there a way to? I wonder how many trophies I have that would like what that equivalent in achievement points would be. It probably wouldn't even be a million. I would assume. Maybe.
I don't know. I think there's websites that translate that. Like I know, like I sort after I hit a million, I sort of stopped going after it, like chasing it. There was a point, and I think you've talked about it in Sacred Symbols. At some point, both the Xbox and PlayStation store just are littered with these indie games that are just they're awful. Like they're designed to give you trophies and achievements in like 5 minutes.
It's embarrassing.
And that's when I stopped doing it.
I always say we used to do a thing at IGN way along 15 years ago called the Trophy Whore War, where we would try to get trophies in a month, and so you can get the most trophies in a month and then report on it on the site. And I always think back at the games that were quote unquote easy, still required 10 or 15 or 20 hours to get a platinum trophy in it. At some point I stopped. It's not really, I don't do it for me. Or I'm sorry, I do it for me. I don't do it to like compete with others. Because again, you can go on PSN profiles or whatever and see all the bullshit people are getting. And I get real trophies, but I just do it. So I like getting trophies and I love getting platinum trophies, but I just do it for fun for the games I want to do. I'm not really trying to compete with anyone,
Yeah. I used to, when I play a game, I had to get a completion in. I had to get the 1,000. And sometimes there was a point in time where if I knew I couldn't get it, I wouldn't play the game, which is an awful way to think about it. But at that point in time, that was like my mentality. But now if I really like a game, I'll get 1,000 in it. Like Expedition 33, my current game of the year. I don't know if you've played it yet. But,
yeah, I did. I beat it.
Made sure to get all the achievements in it. I just beat Death Stranding 2 last night. 65 hours in it, and
Wow.
I was thinking, like, I like this game a lot. It is probably my number 2 or number 3 for game of the year. But at some point, because I was doing the 5-star stuff, the 5-star of the outposts, but at some point I was just like, I'm over this. You know?
Yeah.
I'm completely over it, and I'm like, let's move on with the story to finish it. You know?
I usually go in with an intent, like, and sometimes the intent changes. So Expedition 33 was one of them where I'm like, yeah, I could probably get the platinum in this. I know there were a couple of missable trophies. I got them both, so like I was lined up. And then as I got further into the game, I'm like, I really liked it. I thought it was awesome, but I'm like, I don't really want to do this, you know. And I can always go back in like a new game plus and do it later. But it's funny. I just started Death Stranding 2 last night because in early June I was like, you know what, I haven't played Death Stranding since 2019. Let's go and play it, director's cut. And then I played it for 100 hours and got the platinum in it, and I only finished it yesterday. So I'm like way behind because of trophies now. So
Yeah.
the 5-star thing is I find it. I am very my audience always makes fun of me that I have like very autistic tendencies or whatever, and I really just like checking boxes, and Death Stranding just really does it for me. Where I'm like, this is fucking awesome. Could do this all day. I might become a FedEx driver actually. It's so satisfying.
There's some
Have you ever
the
played,
vibes in that game are just so good. And like the vibes of delivery and the gameplay of, you know, walking, delivering stuff. I know on the outside, if somebody hasn't played it, it sounds stupid. Like, oh, you just walk and deliver packages. But there's like something else about that game that, like the vibe it presents or the feelings it give, like
meditative.
I don't know, like it just walking over the vistas, carrying your cargo, it's like peaceful almost to a certain degree. I know like you fight enemies and stuff, but I never really see. I'm a big walking simulator fan, which Jez likes to make fun of.
Yeah, I like those too. So I'm with you.
Yeah, so but it's always positioned as a negative, and I don't really think it's a negative. You know, one of my
I don't position it as a negative. What are you talking about?
Yeah, you do. You're always positioning those games as negatives.
I just like murdering things in games. You know, I'm shallow like that, right? But even I will be like, I haven't finished Death Stranding 1. It's like in my backlog of shame, but I totally concede there is something meditative and just kind of relaxing is the best word for it. There's something like the first time I always remember, like, is it the band Low Roar or the song?
Mm-hmm.
The first time
Low Roar is the band. Yeah, the guy he died actually. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I got into that band because of Death Stranding, and it's in my Spotify algorithm now, and the first time in Death Stranding 1 where you're first delivering the packages and then that music sort of rolls in, I think that's when it sort of transcends just being a walking simulator for me, and there's like, oh, there's an artistry here, something to it, right? But it is in my backlog of shame, and you know, and it is something I want to eventually come back to. But on the topic of Death Stranding 2, I mean, it is kind of like, it's one of them. It's like Death Stranding hit Xbox, and that's like was the first kind of unexpected PlayStation game, sort of, that hit Xbox in a way.
Definitely. Yeah.
And then like
it was in Game Pass too, wasn't there? Our PC Game Pass, right?
Yeah, it was in PC Game Pass, and it was published by 505 into PC Game Pass, which initially, even that was a bit weird. And then it was like, oh, okay, now the sequels come to Xbox. Was that published by 505 as well, Rand? Or was that the Kojima self-publishing?
The director's cut was published by 505 Games, yeah.
Yeah, so there's that as well. And then, given the advent of Helldivers coming to Xbox with PlayStation Publishing LLC, you have to wonder if Death Stranding 2 will end up being published by PlayStation itself on Xbox. I mean, given the fact
presumably,
yeah. If we've got the prequel, then it makes sense for the sequel to come, I would have thought, right?
Oh, yeah, I would imagine that's definitely going to come to Xbox. I don't know if it's going to take 5 years like it did for the first time, but there must have been a deal. I mean, there's a lot of bespoke stuff going on behind the scenes with PlayStation and different publishers and developers, and I imagine they made that deal with him to lock it down for $5, or 5 years rather, transfer the IP at some point, and let him do what he wants with it. I wouldn't be surprised by that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Death Stranding on Xbox in the next year or two. I would imagine Death Stranding 2 in the next year or two. And yeah, PlayStation LLC is on Xbox now. It's been on Switch. So why not just do it yourself? I mean, why would you? If you start, I started Death Stranding 2, as I said yesterday, and it says clear as day, like, like a movie introduction, like presented, Sony Interactive Entertainment and all the rest. So it's like, yeah, you're going to do it. And there's no reason to kind of cut a middleman in at that point.
Yeah, I suppose that's really the question around with PlayStation's attitude towards publishing on Xbox now is like, previously it was kind of like there's going to be a middleman here to some degree, where it's like either it's 505 publishing it, and then with all the rumors about the next Xbox potentially running Steam itself, you also get this scenario where PlayStation games that are on Steam could arrive on Xbox via a middleman in
Certainly.
a way.
Yeah.
So
Certainly.
does that potentially incentivize PlayStation to move beyond Helldivers 2 with the next Xbox and just be like, well, these games are going to end up on Xbox anyway. We might as well cut out the middleman with Steam and start publishing them directly on Xbox ourselves? Or do you think they'll just defer to Steam and leave it in that methodology?
I see it the other way, where it's funny. I was on Broken Silicon, my friend Tom Moore's Law is Dead's podcast. It's a tech podcast, which I'm not a very tech person, but he brings me on to talk about the industry every once in a while. And he had brought up an interesting point that because of the Steam rumors on the new Xbox, if Sony knew a year ago or whatever at the beginning of the year with Helldivers 2 what they know now, would they have even done it? Because if they just hold pat, then their games will naturally appear on Xbox and they don't even have to cut in Microsoft. And then they can kind of avoid the drama that's around it and just say like, well, we run our games on Steam. This is a machine that accesses Steam. They're your games. I think the bigger danger is other publishers looking at Steam like that and saying like, why even publish an Xbox version if Steam's going to run here? Everyone can just run the Steam game. And Steam's cuts are also Steam's cuts are way better too. So I see it as it's interesting because the Helldivers 2 thing I said on my show, and I said it also on Tom's show, that it's like I would have put $5,000 down that Helldivers wouldn't have come to Xbox. So it's something that I got totally wrong, and the reason I never really clarified this, because you guys are much more in the weeds about the rumors and who you're talking to and stuff on your end. But I remember the original rumor about Helldivers 2, and this is where all the clips are going around about me are from last spring. So, 15 months ago. The rumor I remember said that like Arrowhead is talking to Microsoft, and I'm like, well, no, they're not. Like that can't be true. Like that Arrowhead wouldn't be having those conversations. They don't own the IP. It's not their choice. Why would they be spearheading the conversation? So I really discounted that particular rumor. But it ended up, I don't know if that rumor was actually true or not at the time either. But the bigger question is like what their plan is with a lot of the games as a service, and actually if they would get more juice by just doing it quicker or even day and date. In other words, the game that I keep bandying around is fair games. Not that it's going to be a big game or anything like that. I don't think it will be. But like, does it just make sense to release it on Xbox immediately? And would Helldivers, if this was the plan, would it have made the most sense to just release Helldivers 2 on Xbox right away? Because I think the greater player base will bolster its stickiness earlier as opposed to getting this small bump. Because no matter how it does on Xbox, and it's going to do fairly well, probably in the hundreds of thousands, I would assume, it's not going to be a meaningful bump comparable to getting those people early on and making it even more of a snowball tour de force. So I think that's the major question that they have to ask themselves now is, should we, we already know Marathon and everything, but like, should Horizon Online or whatever that we're working on, the Gummy Bears game and all the rest, like, should those come over day and date? I do think the single player stuff is a little bit stranger because, and one of the major reasons why I didn't think that they were going to do anything is because with games that don't really matter, they refuse to bring them to Xbox. You were talking about publishing intermediaries. Bandai Namco is that current publishing intermediary between Sony and other platforms. And they did Freedom Wars, and Patapon comes out this week, and Everybody's Golf comes out. And those games are all PS5, Switch, PC. Like explicitly not on Xbox. And
Yeah,
so
I did notice that.
I find it, I don't really understand the strategy, but I also think that tells you that if they're not willing to put Freedom Wars, which is a great game, but if they're not willing to put Freedom Wars on Xbox, why would they put God of War on Xbox?
Well,
you know, so I'm kind of confused by the whole strategy, and I don't really know what works best for them. But that's my take on it.
The Freedom Wars, I mean, I'll just say it. The Freedom Wars, the everybody's golf Patapon thing, that is probably not in an Xbox customer's wheelhouse as the games they're probably looking to purchase. Right? So it really could be, we have these games here, and we know that the Xbox audience isn't going to buy them. That's my first guess of like why those games wouldn't be there. But there is a, imagine a hypothetical scenario where God of War comes over. That is a game that has been, AAA, Game of the Year. It actually beat Red Dead Redemption, right? Yeah. Game of the Year contender.
Which is ridiculous, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like that game you could probably point to and be like, all right, that game has sales potential on an Xbox platform where something like Patapon doesn't. So it doesn't really make sense. And maybe it doesn't even make sense to release it on the Switch as well. I mean, I don't know how it would do there.
Well, Lego Horizon didn't seem to do well anywhere.
No,
and that was the first PlayStation LLC game that we saw published over on another platform, because it is important to note that Sony, and you have to be a PlayStation nerd to really know this intuitively, but it's like actually PlayStation Studios have been publishing games on other platforms since the very beginning. The big deal, because like I always bring up, like Wipeout was on N64 and Saturn, right? And things like that. But the big thing, and Sony owned Psygnosis at that time, which would become Sony Liverpool, but that was their very first party studio. But it was always done through an intermediary. So I think Midway or something published Wipeout. And so it is the big deal that they're doing it themselves now. But I must say, I find I understand what you're saying about Freedom Wars, Everybody's Golf, and so on, but I would argue that no one's going to buy those games anywhere. That like they'll sell in Everybody's Golf will probably sell in the low hundreds of thousands. Freedom Wars probably sold below 50,000 units, I would say. I mean, I'm just throwing these numbers out intuitively. So I just feel like excluding Xbox was a signal. And so it seemed, because this even happened, Sony licensed Fantavision, the old PS2 launch game, back to the original creators, and then that came back out, and that was a PlayStation game. Tomorrow Children was given back. The IP was given back to its original people, but never appeared on Xbox. So it always seemed like there was a punitive thing with appearing on Xbox, which made sense to me because that's the only direct competition Sony has in the space. I don't think Sony looks at Nintendo as competition. I think that's becoming more and more obvious, actually. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but I think they're sending crossed signals about what they want to do. And I will say, Cog and I were laughing about this on Sacred Plus, is like, if they do publish like one of these core big PlayStation games, the meltdown is going to be fucking nuts.
Well, you saw what it was like with Xbox, right? When they did.
Certainly, but I think it's going to be, there's just contemporary times, just way more PlayStation players, I think, and they're way less accustomed and attuned to this. And I don't know that it really matters to Sony. I'm sure they're gaming it out, but it would be like, I was arguing that the safest core game, so if you were to look at like 10 of the biggest PlayStation IP, so like God of War, The Last of Us, Uncharted, whatever, Horizon, the safest one, and the one that I also think would do best, would be Spider-Man, the first one. Especially because we know how onerous the licensing situation is on that game. We know that from the leaks from Insomniac, and so that would be a way to extract more money, because I think I'm pretty sure they only made like, I'm not saying only in quotes, but it's like 130 million or something on the original Spider-Man. And it's like, dude, you can really just put your money on the market at that point and make more money. You can buy CDs and let them mature, and it would be better money. So I'm sure they're looking to extract margin on that. I also think that they're probably looking at how good Xbox games are doing on PlayStation. I had Reese Elliott from Alinea Analytics on Sacred Plus last week, and
he's a good dude.
He was going through. Yeah, he's a really interesting person, really nice guy, and I was saying, I have this gut feeling that Forza Horizon has sold comparable to Astrobot on PlayStation. He's like, yeah, it has. They're like, according to their numbers, like 100,000 units apart. So Sony's probably looking at that too and being like, well, there's something here, but I think it's different. I don't think the inverse is true. There are fewer Xbox players. Demonstrably buy fewer games. You even saw it with Helldivers being announced. It's like, well, is it going to be in Game Pass? Is it going to be in Game Pass? Like, absolutely not.
Yeah, we've
so I
got
think
an
there's a lot to
article
work.
about that's doing really good Google traffic right now.
So I think that scrape. If I was at IGN, we would be looking at all that shit.
Oh, we scrape the hell out of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
like,
you might as well.
Yeah, is XYZ game. Like, we don't publish them to the front page, but it's like, if people are asking the question into Google, you know, you can see from the traffic how interested people are in these things. And it's like, is Helldivers coming to Xbox? That's like something people are actively interested in. And I think, like, because in the early days, Microsoft would say things like, oh, Game Pass boosts sales because of the virality, the word of mouth. They said that specifically about Sea of Thieves back in the day. But they've stopped saying it in recent years because that is absolutely, if that was ever true, it definitely isn't now. Because user behavior is crystallized around Game Pass and matured. And now users know what Game Pass is and what it does. And it's like, oh, well, I don't have to buy this game. I don't have to spend 70, 50, 60, 70, and soon $80 or whatever it is on this game anymore. People know that now. And they see it as a vector for saving money, which, there's been intense debate about whether or not it's a viable business strategy or not. So it is interesting that, because of the way Game Pass has potentially evolved Xbox users' purchasing habits, how that impacts whether or not a developer even wants to support Xbox out the gate. Because it is true that, like you say, Steam has more granularity when it comes to offering a cut to developers based on like a sliding scale rather than like a flat 30%. But like with the next Xbox, it does make me wonder if it is a PC, are they going to use the Xbox PC Store cut? Because the Xbox PC Store, the cut on there is only, I think it's 12% off the top of my head.
It's like 88-12.
Yeah, it matches Epic Games. So like, is the next Xbox going to give developers more of a cut than the current Xbox does because it's more of a PC? And does that incentivize developers to keep, to double down on the next Xbox? Because there is going to be a sort of generational gap between Xbox consoles, and there has been some confusion about whether or not it would even run Xbox games initially, and Microsoft had to come out with the AMD and say, yeah, the next Xbox is going to run, backwards compatible games and all that kind of thing. But then it's like, do the backwards compatible games still have the 30% cut, and then only like the modern games have the 12% cut? It's all weird. It's like they're doing something that no one's ever really tried before. But it also goes back to what Microsoft was trying to do with the Xbox all the way back in the day, which is make a PC for the living room. I just want to give a quick shout out to Scarcely Relevant for gifting 5 channel memberships. Thank you so much, dude. Really appreciate you.
What do you think the change is or happened that would allow them to like even think about putting Helldivers on Xbox? Because you mentioned you were pretty adamant that it wasn't going to come.
It seemed unthinkable. I mean, I'll be honest with you, it seemed unthinkable to be honest. Like,
so when you went back to and think about it, being like, all right, what must have changed? Is it Hiroki Toki and the leadership at Sony wanting better margins? Because obviously you knew like Sony's margins earlier this generation were their profit margins were kind of small, but they're getting better. Is it have to do with, hey, maybe we've canceled like 7 live service games, like the live service initiative kind of seems like a bust overall, so maybe we want to scrape back as much money as we possibly can. Maybe with Xbox went to PlayStation to talk about bringing their own games over, that opened up a discussion between the two companies about maybe potentially, I'm not saying like a Madden trade where it's like, hey, we'll give you, like Caleb Williams for this, but it seemed maybe open up the dialogue in regards to some of that stuff. And here you have. Helldivers 2? Like, what do you think is the main, outside of just everything being money? Because obviously it's always money. But what else do you think is going on there behind the scenes?
Yeah, it is an interesting. I mean, it's a great question because you can imagine many different things being true. Sony has had access to Xbox's dev kits and whatever since MLB The Show, and they've probably created some sort of relationship with San Diego studio at this point. And you can imagine, again, I'm just throwing things out there. You can imagine a softening from that front of, kind of realizing the, I don't want to be too dramatic, but humanizing it in some sense where it's like, yeah, like let's go get drinks and let's talk. And I've been privy to so many different conversations. I've been doing this for 23 years, like of people just going out and having drinks or just talking or connecting at E3 or, the Fig back at E3, which was like the Figaro, which was like the famous hotel where all the deals would be made and shit. And a lot of it is just human connection. And so you can imagine something as simple as that, but I don't think it's that necessarily. I think it's Sony is heavily dependent on PlayStation. And this is why I think comparing Xbox and PlayStation even are a little weird in like the ecosystems, because Microsoft doesn't really need or rely on Xbox, but Sony wouldn't exist basically at this point without PlayStation. And they have to treat it, it's like half of its company. And they have to treat it with incredible care. And you're right that fiscal 24, PlayStation made a little over $30 billion, which is a record, but the profit was only $3 billion. And one of the things I was saying to Reese when I had him on the show was the amazing thing about Sony's financial success this generation is how they're amortizing all of their losses and still doing really well. In other words, they'd probably be doing even better. They certainly would be doing even better. And it's kind of incredible that they've absorbed the Bungie purchase and Concord's failure, which was hundreds of millions of dollars, and all these other things, and you don't really even see it in the books. But I think behind the scenes, they're like, well, we should be doing a lot better. We have higher expectations. We need more money. And I think that opens up paths for games as a service and thinking about different ways of doing things. And my own audience knows that I've been really aggressive much to most of their chagrin about PlayStation games going to PC, especially. Like, I think they should be being way more aggressive in that space. Mostly because I think the numbers are panning out that there's really no competition between these two spaces, that they are kind of distinct places with little Venn diagram crossover. And
people are just so digitally locked in,
Right, exactly. And I think people like what they like too. Like, you can just see it in the numbers of PlayStation games to PC is like the numbers generally, Helldivers kind of broke it and other things, but the first games did the best and the newest games did the worst. It has nothing to do with quality. Days Gone having 3 times or whatever the player base of The Last of Us is not about those games being different, like one game being better than the other. It's about the novelty. And once the novelty wore off, people stopped buying the games in these great numbers because they're not really that interested in them. And I think Sony might have realized, like, maybe there's more distinction between these environments than we thought, and maybe we can explore these environments without really cannibalizing ourselves. But the reason that I think that it's so important that, and I know they know this, is it's vital for them to figure this out, figure out the PlayStation situation while not eroding their own value proposition, is because, and I don't know if you guys saw their recent they did like a segment presentation, which was really fascinating. It was all scripted, which was really fucking weird. It was done like an interview, but it was scripted. It was really strange. But they did have these really interesting numbers in a slide where, and this is fucking crazy, man. Like 53% of PlayStation Store revenue, so 53% come from 10 games. 10. And so more than half of their revenue digitally comes from 10 games. And they don't own any of them, by the way. Which is why they need to keep chasing games as a service, obviously. I mean,
that's Fortnite, vital. Call of Duty, stuff like that,
right? And like, yeah, like some EA Sports games and things of that nature. And it's like, Jesus Christ! And then they go in and say, like, this is the second quarter that we've had more players on PS5 than PS4. And they haven't announced PS3 numbers in a while, but a couple of years ago they were like, we still have 3 million people on PS3. And I was like, what? So, and that's monthly active users, obviously. And so I just think they look at it and they're like, we need to be aggressive in the places where we can make the most money. These games as a service are doing incredibly well for us on our platform. We're vulnerable. And because we don't own any of them, they don't really need us. We need them. And so I think they're figuring out ways to kind of proliferate these IP. And unlike Death Stranding or Neo or Stellar Blade or whatever, they actually own Helldivers. And so I think that they're looking at it with a special level of care, which is why I think they'll be aggressive with games as a service in the future. But I think there will be a distinction between that and the single player stuff. And so yeah, I think that's like kind of what ended up happening. Do I think it was like some sort of like a GM NFL trade? Probably not. But I think they were like, yeah, let's do it. And I think Sony says so little that they don't really put themselves at risk of having a major PR crisis that they have to deal with. Yeah. Where it's like, oh, but you said this, and this. Like, Matt Booty or Phil Spencer would have said, been.
Yeah.
They speak too much. So I think that they were probably game planned it and were like, yeah, we can get away with this, and they're going to. And it's great. I mean, I don't really care. I'm just surprised by it. That's all.
What about this scenario?
Sorry, I was just gonna say, like, I was also like, I said on our podcast that this Helldivers would never come to Xbox. It was just like I was convinced that Sony was just going to be so stubborn about it, because my argument was always Helldivers makes a lot of sense on Xbox, to your point that some of the environments just don't really cross over. Like, obviously, Helldivers is very Halo coded with the Halo ODST drop pods and all that kind of thing, fighting aliens. It's very Halo. So it always made sense to launch it on Xbox in my head, from my perspective. So like maybe that's part of the aspect to it. But you're absolutely right that different platforms have different user behavior. Like, if you looked at Overwatch's Steam figures, you'd think the game was dead. But I know for a fact that Overwatch is far from being dead, and you can look at, like, there's like external APIs for Overwatch and stuff. But like tons of people play Overwatch on console, and very many more people play it on Battle.net, not Steam. So Steam's always like this sort of, it's always held up as this standard of like, oh, look at the Steam stats, they're all dead, they're dying, Starfield's dead on Steam or whatever. But if you go and look at like the API for Starfield mods, for example, there's actually like a lot of active players in Starfield right now, which just maybe suggests that it's resonated more with console players than not. Which, further to that point, Starfield's almost certainly going to come to PlayStation in the near future. But what were you going to say, Ryan?
I was going to say, I don't know if you remember this, Colin, but or if you played these games, like the Ori franchise, Ori and the Blind Forest, Ori. And
I had Thomas
Mahler.
Thomas Mahler, yeah, I had him on recently, yeah, but I didn't play them. No, I didn't.
They came to Switch close after launch, and I remember that was kind of the first big outrage, like, oh, Xbox games going to their platform, and Phil said some things which ended up not being true because of obviously what's happening now. But I do recall at the time it being like, Microsoft owns the IP, but it's a second-party dev. And I remember sort of hearing the reason why is because it was a favor to Moon Studios to put those games on Switch. Like, they went to Microsoft and asked if, they could put the game on Nintendo Switch, and Microsoft thought about it and said, sure. So then a part of me was like, I wonder if we're in the same situation with PlayStation, where maybe Arrowhead went to PlayStation and asked them if they could put it on Xbox. And as a favor for doing such a great job on the game and making them a whole bunch of money with Helldivers 2, they acquiesced and been like, okay, absolutely. Yeah, put it on Xbox. I also then think like Nixus, being that it's a first party studio that Sony used to port, maybe they don't have a lot of projects because you've kind of ported a lot of the PC, a lot of PlayStation games and their back ports. So maybe they don't really have a lot of current stuff to work on because, they're not doing day one. Even though some of the games are day one on PC and some of them aren't, maybe they didn't have like a current project. So that kind of just like gave them something to do that would provide a good return on investment. Maybe, and I was thinking this, like maybe Sony just doesn't view Xbox as a competition in that way anymore, where they view it like, okay, moving forward, they're only going to have this many users. So if we do decide to let's take advantage and monetize the user base without any threat of getting of Xbox making a comeback or outselling us, we can put our games on that platform with no fear of them getting bigger, but we can extract as much money as we possibly can to help our bottom line. So, because if you were to ask me, if Last of Us came to Xbox next week, would that hurt PlayStation? I would say no. Or if like God of War came to Xbox, would that hurt PlayStation in the long run? I say no. I mean, even if you look at like the sales, it's like the most competitive market for them for Xbox is North America, and then less so the UK. But then like Europe is pretty much Sony land. So maybe
really
PlayStation looked at it and was like, there's really no threat to our console business, and we might be okay releasing these other games as long as they're years and years away, just because we know that these are high profile stuff and they'll actually make money. What do you think about any of those? Any
Yeah,
of
well,
those?
yeah, I think you can make really compelling arguments that are contradictory, because I
Mhm.
think that there are a lot of, you're kind of like at this origin point and you can go in a few different directions, and all of them kind of make some justifiable level of sense. But I think they all come with major downsides too, which is why I wonder if you just generally keep the status quo and just massage these games as a service games to other platforms. But I think I personally think that there would be major harm to the PlayStation brand if they started putting their core games on other platforms, specifically on Xbox. This is what I was trying to kind of articulate on my own show was Sony looks at each of the three competitors in the field other than it. So like, PC and Steam, Xbox and Nintendo. I think they look at them distinctly different from one another. And I think the only one that's really on their battlefield anymore and kind of a problem for them is Xbox. So you're going to want to play with them most harshly. And I think that there's like it's very similar to Halo and Gears and Forza kind of being on the table, especially Forza and now Gears already coming over to PlayStation. Like there's it's like Pokemon, like psychological damage, psychic damage, done by like these kinds of things to fan bases. And I just think there is a measure of importance to that, because if you break up this idea that there are games you can only truly play in the console space on PlayStation, then I think the brand starts losing its identity.
But like, I
think that's dangerous.
I mean, see, I've wrestled with this thought process myself, like, because obviously, famously, I didn't believe Xbox would put its games on PlayStation a couple of years ago. And I was incredibly wrong about that. And I've sort of gone back and forth with myself about how this would affect the Xbox brand and how it would affect, like, player base numbers and all that kind of thing. And, just taking Microsoft's SEC statements at face value, they could be doing some, clever accounting there or something maybe. But Microsoft's always maintained that their console or install base specifically has remained static at least, and then playtime hours on console has grown. I had even assumed that they were including cloud in that, because obviously the cloud for Xbox is console based. Those users are using Xbox consoles in the cloud. But I asked PR and they said that doesn't even include cloud gamers either. So increasingly, I'm just like, I think the audience that we know, and this is my current thought process on it, and it could be wrong, but the audience we know, the audience that we're in the weeds with, like the people who listen to podcasts or read articles on Windows Central or engage on Twitter and all that kind of thing. I just think like increasingly that's a very loud minority. And that's kind of reflected in what PlayStation was saying that you mentioned, that like half of their revenue comes from just 10 games. And those are like, how much of the revenue comes from how many other games, like is the next half of it just 20 games or 30 games or something like that? Do people actually really care about any of this stuff when you look outside of the hardcore bubble? And are you not just maybe like, this is my thought process about Xbox now. Are you just like, if you're marketing a game, whether it's like Halo or Gears or Forza or God of War or whatever, is it not just the better aren't you just maximizing your marketing spend by making sure it's in as many places as possible? Because the kids growing up, they've all grown up with like, the iPad kids, Roblox is on every platform imaginable now, and and Fortnite's on every platform, and it's like, is that not just maybe the expectation? And people our age are just sort of, we just have a completely different mindset about it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean,
that?
Well, I think that's again what I was saying earlier about there's so many, not so many, but several different arguments you can make that all make sense. And that's another argument that makes perfect sense. I think the one thing that I think, again, Sony kind of first interacting in a serious way with the Xbox ecosystem with MLB The Show. So you're talking about the late 2010s and into 2020 and 2021. This gives them data and they understand how things. I would especially love to know how MLB The Show did comparable to it being cannibalized, being on Game Pass for those years and all of the rest. But anyway, I think that they started having data. It's what I always bring up about Horizon Forbidden West. Like when the second Horizon game came into PlayStation Plus, like really quickly, that was an experiment. And what they found was that they lost an enormous amount of money, which is why Jim Ryan went on the stand later at the FTC thing, or was deposed or whatever it was, and said like, we can't do it. It's not sustainable. Like we would lose all of this money. It's because they lost like $100 million doing that. And that was just a one example with one game, not even at launch. But you get data, you understand things better. And there's no doubt that like this Helldivers 2 move, at the very least, is going to give Sony amazing insight into the purchasing power or potential purchasing power of a new ecosystem in a way where it's what I said when Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment and all these games came out. It's like, if you really want these games, like you got to buy these early games. And so I think they're just deploying this game and they're going to find out. And it's funny because I wonder if we're talking about things that they might not even really have a firm grasp on yet either, because they want to see how things do, and then go from there. So like they might not have a single plan beyond this yet. And right. Again, if I were a betting man, and I am, and I make bad bets and I make good bets, that's why with the Helldivers 2 thing, it's like, yeah, I was. By the way, just real quick, it's like it annoys me when people say I'm wrong and then I don't admit I'm wrong. Like, you can really tell who listens to Sacred Symbols or who listens to my content. You don't have to. I don't care if you do or not, and doesn't listen and just makes assumptions, because we dedicate entire parts of the podcast to everything we get wrong. So it's like probably the most accountable gaming podcast you're ever going to hear. And I would argue the Helldivers 2 thing is like not even in the top 25 things I've gotten wrong. So it's not like that big of a deal. But on the other hand, it's like, if I were to make another bet, it's like I find it really hard to believe that at least in the short to midterm that Sony is going to put like major first party single player games on Xbox. There's no doubt that I could be, look at Helldivers, like I could be dead wrong about that, but it just seems unthinkable. But then again, so did Helldivers. So I think we are in a new phase and a new mode, but I think it's really important that we understand that Sony has to treat PlayStation with incredible care, and anything that they do that undercuts its own ability to make money as an inertia machine is really bad for it. So a great example is they sold 2.3 million copies of The Last of Us Part 2 during the 8 weeks of The Last of Us Season 2 on HBO. And you would assume that cut is maybe half PC, I don't know, half PlayStation 5 or whatever. But if you gravitate people towards PS5 to the tune of like 1 million new players, then you have them in your ecosystem. And then, as you know, you make an enormous amount of money on them, or at least potentially do. If you start giving them options of where you can get your games, you'll make money. You're going to have to split it with the platform holder, and then you're going to lose them to the potential of mining them for money, and they need to be mined for money. Sony does that. The reason that it doesn't really matter what's going on with Sony's single player games as much as we all love them is because they don't really make any money on them. The money's made by others spending money on other things on their platform. You have to treat that with incredible care, in my opinion.
Which is why Jim Ryan was very against Xbox buying Activision because of Call of Duty stuff. Because, I mean, famously he said, "What if they didn't have Call of Duty, their business would never recover." I mean, we know all the ABK stuff that happened back then. But yeah, so when I agree with you about like, hey, we're gonna do this and we're gonna get the information. What do you feel about the release date though? Putting up against Gears Reloaded.
Gears. Yeah, that it's funny because you were saying it earlier about could it have been some sort of deal, and I'm like, that's the best indication that maybe there was some sort of deal, because it's like Gears is the biggest. In my Forza Horizon is probably going to be the best selling of the games so far, even through Gears. Like Forza Horizon has sold more than 3 million units apparently on PS5. which is crazy. I mean, the game is
Pretty
from
good number for a game that old, yeah.
Yeah, it's from 2021. People were spending between what 70 and 90 or something on it.
Yeah,
you can get it early. I think they sold 1 million copies in pre-order. So I don't know if Gears is necessarily going to do as well because I don't think it has the zeitgeist right now.
but it's got the novelty though.
Right, exact. That's exact. And it's cheaper, which is also important.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you're right, Rand, that like there was this idea of like, yeah, let's defray the pain a little bit by distracting from each other's releases. But maybe I don't like it. But is it? My other opinion is like, so I own a game studio, obviously a small one, and we have the right to pick our release dates as long as like you slot in basically, and you have to like get permission and like this is when we have to launch, and we're identifying this date, and then they look at it and they kind of make approvals. If you're a big studio, you kind of can do whatever you want, I assume. And it could have just been like, oh, we're gonna like. It could have just been Sony being like, we're gonna do it on the day that Gears is coming out.
Yeah.
To so who knows? But my opinion, and this is what I was saying earlier, is that you can tell that Jim Ryan and his people seem to have a lot of disdain for the Xbox people and for Xbox.
Sure do.
That was the culture that they were brought up in, and I think it's different now. And I also think the games person on Sony side, so Herman Holst, was demoted and is now no longer really making decisions to the extent that Nishino's making them now. And he's a hardware and services person. So you might also just have a different perspective kind of shining through. So I think it's a very complex. I mean, we're prognosticating. It's really impossible to know, as you guys understand fully, but it's probably a little bit of multiple columns,
Yeah, I've tried to find out more about how the Helldivers thing with Xbox came about, talking to sources and stuff like that. Obviously, it's been a bit chaotic, obviously, with the layoffs, and we broke the story that the initiative had been closed, and Perfect Dark had been cancelled, and all that kind of stuff, and trying to cut through all the what's true and what isn't true, like during that week was, I was sleeping like 3 hours a day that week for like half of it. But like one of the things that I wasn't really able to lock down in any definitive sort of way was like how the Helldivers thing came about, because obviously there was a lot of people who were like, oh, Microsoft cynically pushed this out to sort of cover up some of the layoffs drama, and it doesn't seem like that was true. This is like something that was months in the works, and I doubt Sony would be like someone who'd be like, nah, we don't necessarily want to announce this on top of layoffs,
Yeah, Colin, I saw some people suggest that Microsoft was in charge of when Helldivers 2 gets announced. And I was like, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I mean, our games are nowhere near big enough to have marketing deals or anything like that. No one really, our games sell in the tens of thousands of copies. So we really have we don't have a bespoke kind of unique relationship. We have like the very by the books, check the boxes relationship. I assume, as I was saying earlier, things get more flexible, and I just imagine both sides have to agree, but really it's the publisher and the developer that usually drives, unless the platform holder has money in the game, of course, and they're advertising it themselves or marketing it or whatever.
It's on the
usually
dashboard.
The publisher and the developer that drives that stuff.
You turn on Xbox, one of the first ads you see, Helldivers 2, pre-order $39.99 right there, smack right in one of those big spots.
Yeah, Sony's paying for that almost certainly, because I don't. It sounds like you were just playing Death Stranding too, so it's like on PSN, the Sony or Microsoft is spending money advertising their games and like pushing them. And I should have taken a screenshot. I don't know why I didn't, but there was a time where I saw a banner like pop up, and they're dynamic, but I don't know why it would be pitched to me, because I don't play multiplayer games, and I only bought a couple of the Xbox games, but it seemed like it was like all Activision, Bethesda, Xbox games being advertised, and so they're really pushing. And you saw that, by the way, in the Circana results that just came out when we started recording today, where it's like Xbox is just dominating.
They've got
the sales.
Top. They've got 4 slots in the top 5, I think, or something like that. Or
yeah,
top
it's incredible.
6.
It's like 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah.
I even wonder if I know this probably isn't realistic, because I agree with you, Colin, about like the games most likely to come over are the live service stuff, because I think that makes the most sense. But there was a thought today when about the Forza Motorsport situation, I was like, well, there's an open runway for a sim racer. Why not put the next Gran Turismo on there? Which I think is unlikely, but
it is. That's funny because when I just did that exercise on Sacred Plus with Cog and Maddie, I brought up Gran Turismo, where I'm like, yeah, with what unfortunately happened to Turn 10, and it seems like kind of the fall of the mainline Forza series, it's like, yeah, there is actually an opening here, but Sony was long rumored to be working on a PC port that I think they pulled back of Gran Turismo, what it would have been 7, I guess, or are we up to, I don't even know where we're at.
Yeah.
And I don't play that series at all. But they pulled back on it, and I'm like, yeah, maybe it's just because those are I was telling the audience, because a lot of people don't know, like, Gran Turismo games sell 8, 10, 12, 14 million units. The interesting thing about the single player stuff, though, or more latent arcade style single multiplayer stuff like Gran Turismo, is there's actually more money to extract out of those because you don't really need to manage them. Like, bringing Helldivers 2 over is going to require upkeep because it's a live game. And so you could, again, make this Steelman argument being like, well, if you're bringing Helldivers over, why not bring the Uncharted trilogy over, charge $70 for it, and just let it sit there and sell a few million copies? You're going to make like $200 million. But again, there's downside to all of this sorts of stuff. I just think, don't you guys agree? I mean, I would really love to know what you guys think. If I'm crazy about this, is like, Jez, we identified Helldivers 2 as being like unthinkable, but isn't it truly unthinkable that like God of War or The Last of Us or something like that would go to Xbox? Like, I can't even fathom it.
Man, I honestly,
it's unfathomable to me.
I would have agreed with you like before, but now I'm just sitting there thinking, is it though? You know, I mean, I go back and forth with myself about this stuff, and I just keep thinking, like, if everything is about margins now, and there is this just sort of admission from all these companies that people are entrenched where they are, and that Gen Z's gone to these platform games as a platform titles like Roblox and Fortnite, and like maybe Gen Z just isn't interested in God of War at all. You know, maybe it's just like let's just do it, you know. And like the whole concept of a console revolves around the sort of Gen X millennial kind of thing, and whereas like everyone else younger is just focused on Steam and PC now. Like part of me is just wondering, like, maybe the Sony's plays like for next gen, maybe they make their own PC store and cut out Microsoft and Steam and put that on the next Xbox and sell God of War to Xbox like that. But then, you know, I honestly just part like my it's almost like there's two parts of me conflicting about whether or not this is unfathomable. The pure mathematical side of me is just thinking there's no downside to this. And I agree with Rand that, like, I don't think God of War hurts PlayStation on Xbox at all, because I don't think any PlayStation guy would ever consider switching platform for this.
I mean, Face in chat says, if Sony starts porting single player games to Xbox, I would switch to PC. And I spend a lot of money in the PlayStation ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean,
that's just one person, though.
Yeah, it is, but he, I think, represents it's gonna be, that's why Cog and I were like hysterical, because I'm like, dude, it's gonna be so bad if they, like, for the fan base and like for the ecosystem. And I don't mean bad, like it would be great for Sony, who cares? I'm saying like the way people are gonna handle it is gonna be bad.
But I think like, Xbox fans have gotten over it now to some degree.
I don't know.
Some of them
have.
They're hard.
Some of them haven't, but I think the ones that haven't have moved on now, and that everyone else is just like, whatever. You know, the people that have stuck around, which is, to be fair, the vast majority, if you believe Microsoft's, you know, user base stats from their SEC discussions. I just think there's just a mathematical aspect to this where it's just like, there's no downside here. I think especially like when you look at titles like, I don't think God of War really has an equal on Xbox from, you know, Microsoft doesn't really make any games like that. And also like Gran Turismo obviously is like, there's a huge gap for a sim racer on Xbox now, and obviously there's a lot of racing fans on Xbox because of Forza Horizon, like, and Gran Turismo still has this, you know, nostalgic prestige, especially in the UK. Like Gran Turismo is like even I know how much cachet that franchise has, and I just think like there's just it's kind of free money, you know. The amount of money you spend to do the port is negligible to what you're gonna earn in returns, and you increase the margin on that software, that initial software spend, without potentially losing anything besides some people who are mad on Twitter about it for a bit.
Right, but I agree with you to a point, but I think it's like, all right, so God of War 2018 comes to Xbox, they do the Forza Horizon thing, they charge $60 for it, right? Full price. What I've been calling on Sacred Symbols punitive pricing, right? Like, we're doing this, we all know it's weird, you're going to pay for the honor. And so they make their money. Let's just be, it will be easy with the money and say it's like, $45 to Sony, $15 to Xbox, right? But that is short-term gain, nice gain. God of War on Xbox would make an enormous amount of money. But when you see in their financial presentations, it's like, okay, but if we attract people to our platform, we make about $1,000 per person lifetime off of them buying whatever. And do we want to risk that for 5% cuts, basically? And what I mean by that is 5% of the natural lifetime gain of a PlayStation owner by potentially filling a gap and not just attracting people over to our platform entirely. That's why I was saying earlier about The Last of Us, like, there is something powerful about people seeing that HBO show. When Neil was on Sacred, he told me it's like 2/3 of the audience has never played the game. And then they go and they buy a PlayStation. It's what happened with MLB The Show, and why I think losing that was a major deal, and why Sony was really fucking upset about it, was because they very quietly made a fan base of baseball fans that naturally just bought PlayStations for generations, including one person in my own family that just plays fucking the show, So I just think that there's like natural. It's why the marketing rights on Grand Theft Auto are so important and all these things. Like, there's a natural inclination to discount this idea that actually we really need these people on our platform. And even if we were only able to attract, and this is what I was saying about the math, like, so imagine if Sony perspective, were able to attract one of the 10 potential God of War like purchasers on Xbox to Sony, we actually make more money on that one person lifetime than we would have to sell it to 10 people over there. So I just think that that's like a really important part. And that's why I keep saying, like, Sony is so wrapped up in PlayStation that it's very difficult for them to, it could be catastrophic to undercut that for them, I guess is what I'm saying. They're so small that I'm pretty sure Microsoft just laid off more people than PlayStation employees.
Yeah.
Like the 9,000 people?
Yeah, I think Sony's at like, or PlayStation is at like 10 or 10.5 or something, So I just think you're dealing with different scales, and they have to really protect the marketplace, because without that marketplace, they are screwed. It's not even the God of Wars or the Last of Us that are important. It's the latent money of like being the place where you can go to play all of these different games. And that's why I think the best, if they ask me for my advice, and they don't, I would tell them, like, you really need to figure out what they're doing with this Steam on Xbox thing, because if they're really going to do this, then you can just wait. And you don't have to take any hit, and it will just take a year or two, and you just wait, and then you won't. And again, I really think that this is the major problem with the Steam idea. It's much like Game Pass. It's a very pro-consumer. Like, why wouldn't the consumer like that choice? Oh, I can buy anything on any storefront I want. But the second you give people access to Steam on an Xbox, they're just going to buy Steam games, or use Game Pass, But the thing is that Microsoft can withstand that hit to the bottom line in order to migrate people over to this whatever future Windows machine that they want to do, or whatever. I don't know what, I guess we would call that a PC. So I don't know. I just think that like Sony is in a much tougher position, certainly long term, because they are so tied into this idea of the platform. I think we all agree that a couple decades from now, there will be a unified whatever the fuck it is. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I don't think we'll be playing consoles in like 2045.
I think
hardware.
Hardware. I hope I'm wrong. I'm a console dude. Like,
me too.
I would love to play a console for the rest of my life. I just don't know. To Jez's point that he always makes, and he's right. It's like we're relics now, but we're relics with paying power. Like, we spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
I spend $2,000-$3,000 a year sometimes on PSN, right? Like, but I'm gonna go away one day, and you're gonna have these people behind us that aren't acclimated to those things, and this is where Sony, I think, is their major Achilles heel. But they don't have to worry about it quite yet.
As like Gen Alpha, the younger generations don't care about consoles. they were brought up where like stuff is everywhere, like iPads. Maybe that's a problem that these companies are gonna have to face in the future. But before we move on to like the Xbox discussion, because I know Colin brought up the Steam thing and all those other things.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump around.
Well, no, we'll talk about that because we got the whole Xbox side stuff. I did want to ask you about how are you feeling about PlayStation's game? Their output this generation with the live service stuff having one massive success and then one massive failure, and Marathon not looking so hot, and Fair Games also not looking so hot. Bunch of canceled games behind the scenes, granted not announced, which is the opposite of Xbox where they did announce them. How are you looking at like Herman Hulst and that whole situation with the games output and moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, I think my own audience rolls their eyes at this point because I say so much, and I've been pretty hard on Sony because it's like they had the right idea, and I really believe that the strategy of spending a lot of money on games as a service is smart. And I think it actually only becomes more smart the more you see the way new games sell and like the numbers we're talking about and the games that just dominate, and they're just desperate to get one of those games. And I don't blame them. Microsoft bought in on a couple of those games very wisely, especially the Minecraft purchase, which was done so cheaply, comparable to what they've gotten out of it. And then with Call of Duty and all the Blizzard games and everything, like Microsoft's really nicely set up. The MMOs from Bethesda, like there's just a bunch of things. Like Sony has none of that except for Helldivers. And what's funny about Helldivers specifically is that they absolutely had no idea what they had. You can just tell by the way they were marketing and talking about it and all that. They had no idea that game was going to be what it was. And so even when they were maturing something like that, they couldn't quite identify it. I think the major problem is that they employed this really sound strategy about as poorly as you could have possibly imagined. Like just totally botching it. Those old like 90s and 80s infomercials where the person's like carrying all the shit and he's like spilling it all over the place and like looking like an idiot. Like that was like what they were doing. And I don't understand why they made the decisions that they made to try to get to this point of having viable games as a service when they could have done it so much differently and so much more successfully. And the one thing that I will not give them credit for, but like be like, I think people are being too hard on them, is like, look at all the games they canceled and all that rest. And I'm like, yeah, they did cancel a lot of games, probably somewhere in the $1.5 billion worth of games. But they didn't announce almost any of them. The only reason we know about them is because of a bunch of leaks. In other words, it's not like they were that ahead of like over their skis where they were like, here are all the games we're working on. And like, it's like, no, like the God of War game was never announced. Ben's game was never announced. Twisted Metal was never announced, like, so we have
the only one that was announced was Last of Us Online.
The Last of Us, right? Yeah. And I know people. I've said this before, but it's like, so I know your audience probably has heard me say it too. It's like I know people that played it extensively, and it was supposed to be great. That's the thing that's like really the most frustrating is but this is part of the mismanagement I was talking about. Instead of saying we have an ecosystem of studios that we've created in order to create certain types of games, and we need to let them continue to do that. And if they want to explore something different, we'll let them do that, but we need to really manage it very carefully. But what we'll do is we'll take the separate piece of money and we'll give it to all second parties and see what they can do. And they did that with Deviation and Firewalk and so on and so forth. But then they started making like really asinine decisions. It's like, well, we're going to buy Bungie and spend more on it than we've spent on every studio we've ever acquired combined. And by the way, we've never worked with them before. We've never done that either. And then we're going to buy Firewalk and we're going to buy Haven. And we're going to invest in all of these first-party resources. We're going to let Bend make a multiplayer game. We're going to let Bluepoint make a multiplayer game. We're going to let Naughty Dog spend years and hundreds of people's time on a multiplayer game and then let them figure out deep into development, oh shit, we can't support this game. It's mismanagement across the board. It's really, it's why I think Herman Hulst ultimately was demoted from co-CEO. Is because, and why he probably shouldn't even be in the position he's in now. I mean, I always make fun of Matt Booty, and Matt Booty's like exponentially worse than Herman Hulst. Like, don't get it twisted by any stretch of the imagination. But it's like, should either of these people really be in their positions? Neither of them are really doing a very good job. So while some games are coming out of the PlayStation ecosystem And it's not a surprise that the cancellations have created a cascading effect of a lot of these studios simply won't be heard from until the PS6. In fact, a couple of them are, or at least one of them in Fire Sprite is explicitly hiring for PS6 for next gen hardware at this point. It's like, yeah, it's not a huge surprise. You wasted all these studios. You let your port studio, or your remake studio create a multiplayer game. You let your crown jewel single player studio make a multiplayer game. You let the team in Bend that just sold 10 or 12 million copies of Bend make a multiplayer game. Why did you allow this? You spent all of these resources buying these studios that you never worked with, and you know that doesn't work for you, and it's all failing now. And you bought Bungie for their expertise, but then you replaced them with your own people at the top because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. You bought a lemon. Like, just, it's fumbling left and right. It was horribly. Sony is so lucky, dude. Like, that they are the kind of the de facto default platform for a la carte sales in the hardcore console space. Like, nothing they've done has helped them get into their position. It's all inertial. And I say that all the time on my shows. It's like they are incredibly fortunate that they position themselves in a way where when all the stuff started going south, it started going south when it did because they were already well established. If this happened 10 years ago, it would have been really bad because they're not so reliant on their own products anymore.
Do you think that, like...
So I don't know if that, so I don't know if that makes sense. I think that, in other words, the strategy was right. It's what I feel about Game Pass. Good strategy, bad execution. You know? So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I feel like do you agree with this thing that it's like, this is like an industry-wide almost panic? Because there's also, you know, this tale about EA wanting, like, they've got, again, this might not be true, because to me this seems crazy, but EA reportedly wants 100 million players for the next Battlefield.
Oh yeah, I saw that. That seems incredibly unrealistic.
Yeah, so, but, you know, like, even disregarding that, it does feel like, you know, when you look at things like Dragon Age of Valgard and the, you know, Anthem even going further back, it does feel like a lot of studios have sort of rushed out into live service or tried to impose live service on their existing studios with some aggressively mixed results. I mean, Sea of Thieves ended up being successful, but like at launch it was very much not successful. I think these not no secret, right? And people have criticized Microsoft a lot for saying like, oh, you took what Rare was, you know, for these games like Banjo, and then you turned them into a live service game. I mean, it could have been a failure if they didn't stick really hard with it. Do you think there's just like this sort of industry-wide almost panic going on? You know, we hear things like, oh, TikTok's to blame, playtime hours are down, all these kind of excuses. Or do you think there's just, I don't know, almost like a coincidental coalescence of failure going on?
I think that everyone's dealing with a similar problem, which is that it's like the so-called attention economy. It's what you're saying with TikTok and all these things.
Yeah.
But I think it's even deeper than that. I think people want to play games. I think people want to play traditional games. I think there's more than enough people to support that kind of initiative. I think there are too many games. I think that people are spending too much money on too many games. It's not even that games cost them a certain amount of money to make. It's that people are spending too much money on too many of these kinds of games. It's kind of like what Embracer, I think, ran into, and what I think was the obvious downfall of why the publisher was always going to fall apart, and why that was one of the things, you know, we talked about what I got wrong with Helldivers. I was all over the Embracer shit long before they melted down, because I'm like, this actually makes no sense. You're buying so many studios that you are going to be releasing like a game every few weeks. Like, how is that even, who's going to buy all this stuff? And I think that's the bigger problem, is not to reduce what you have and say like this audience is insufficiently large or they have insufficient purchasing power, but rather to say like, how can you get their time and money reasonably when there's thousands of games coming out every year? An interesting point is like the NES had fewer than 1,000 games on it. It's like you were getting 15,000 games in a few years on Steam. Like, there's just there's too much going on. It's too chaotic. You can't predictably make money in an environment where the attention is split in so many different directions, but you can't also force people to back away. So what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to lose their shirts, and things are going to truncate because of that, because there's only going to be so many people that can take these risks and get to the next game. It's why Game Pass is so attractive to AA games, is because like they can take the money up front and basically say like, oh shit, at least we're going to survive to the next game. And like that's all anyone's looking for at this point. But I think it's just because there's just too much shit. And it was what Rand was saying earlier about like these storefronts. I really do think that Sony's horrible about it. Nintendo, you know, my wife's an Xbox and Nintendo player, so I'm always seeing her poke around these different storefronts, and it's like, damn, the tip of the spear of fixing this problem is actually the storefronts having some sort of quality control, some sort of, I don't want to say Nintendo seal quality. That was more of like a marketing gimmick, but I think a great way to protect the finances of traditional gaming is to make it harder to sell games on these platforms. But since that's not going to be in reality, and since we have a very laissez-faire attitude towards the selling of games, which is fine, I think it's going to mean there's going to be way more losers coming up, like way more. And so, yeah, everyone's going to... The cuts aren't done at Xbox. The cuts aren't done at PlayStation. Nintendo's probably fine. They're so small. And certainly a lot of these publishers, like if EA really has an expectation that many people are going to play Battlefield, they might as well just lay off the teams now.
But they said they has like a budget almost $500 million or something. It's like, I love Battlefield. It's my go-to multiplayer game over COD, but that seems unrealistic. And they're not even the publisher of unrealistic expectations. That's Square Enix, right? So it seems almost like destined to fail.
Yeah, it's too. But you have. I almost find the Battlefield investment less dubious just from the perspective of like if we hit here, it really is going to make us a lot of money. They know this from Apex Legends in some way, and of course they're sports games. While I find the bigger losers are going to be a lot of these teams that spend $50, $70, $100 million on single player fare of the lower AAA quality, where there's just no room for any of this stuff anymore. And I think it's going to cause a lot of destruction. People are very focused on AI, and that's a good thing to focus on. My brother's a professional animator, and it's really bad out there right now, you know? So I totally get that. But I think just from a consumer behavior perspective, less is more. And studios should be focusing on fewer, higher quality games that like really draw your attention and demand. Like, you know what's a great example? What's that studio, Rebel Wolves, that's making that vampire Witcher?
the ex CD Projekt
Red
guys.
Right, the Daywalker or the Dawnwalker, something like that.
Yeah, that game looks that game looks awesome. It does. You know, like really good. Massage it, spend time and money, and make it right, and like have something that's almost guaranteed to succeed. Because if you don't have something like that, I think it's going to be tough rowing for you out there.
Yeah. You know, I got to bring this up because I did see your tweet to Jez. I think you went back and forth, and we're going to get to the Xbox stuff here. But a quick question. You know, the Helldivers 2 thing, we talked about. You know, it's like, yeah, I was wrong. Whatever. We're all wrong about everything all the time. You know, like nobody's got 100% perfect track record. But one of the things you've been very, very, very adamant about is the whole Black Myth Wukong secret deal stuff.
Oh yeah, no, it doesn't make any sense.
And I remember Jez had tweeted to you, and you guys were gonna, you know, I'll get you on Sacred Plus to talk about it. Now, with you not being correct about Helldivers 2, does that make you look at the Black Myth Wukong thing in a different light, or are they two separate things where it's like, well, one doesn't have anything to do with the other, but because Jez is here, you can ask him, and Jez is given the reason why there was a deal for it publicly on the show before. So if you're
I don't know that I've heard the full explanation of it.
Right. So what I was told, right, and I'm pretty sure that Forbes and IGN were also given this information. What I was told was Black Myth Wukong devs they're all in with Xbox until one day they were like, oh, actually we've now got this exclusivity clause, which it was implied to me was engineering oriented, that Sony was going to help them get the game to a minimum standard of quality for PlayStation, and you know, and that included some exclusivity time, but it was never really implied to me that it wasn't because of the Series S. So my thing's always been like, I think both situations can be true. where it's like they took a deal for exclusivity because they knew they were going to sell more on PlayStation and that they were going to spend more optimizing for the Series S. So it was just like a smart economical decision for them. And, you know, they never really come out and said there wasn't a deal in place. They've always pointed fingers at the S, which to me suggests that, you know, it's probably true that they made the deal because of the S, but just that there was a deal in place. But they want to save face because they did say there was an Xbox version going to be there at launch and then there wasn't, you know. So that's kind of like the best information that I've got right now. Which to me is just like, you know, well, whatever at the end of the day. But because the whole controversy around it and then, you know, fanboys getting upset about it on both sides of the fence and getting mad at me and Paul Tassi for putting the information out there. And I suppose IGN as well.
Everyone's always mad at Paul Tassi. I don't know. I don't really know him, but everyone always seems to be mad at him. Everyone's mad at me all the time too. I just don't engage with it. Like, I don't know why people are so eger to engage with like everyone that hates you. You know, I just say what I have to say and just kind of move on with my life.
I had a huge back and forth with Chris Avallone the other week.
Oh yeah. Oh, I DM'd you about that actually because I was like, I don't really like the way I said. Well,
I have no idea what that was about.
Yeah, I was just I've spoken to Chris Avallone. I have no problem with him. I just it's I don't like the way people talk to you. I don't understand why people have to be so mean. You know, like
I don't know.
I'll keep our private conversations to myself.
I don't do myself any favors. I think sometimes because I do get defensive, and I think that's just the way I've been brought up. I think I've got better at it over time, but yeah, people came at me about the Black Myth Wukong reporting quite a lot. There was actually someone on Reset Era, which I thought was quite funny, where it was like, if it's bad news about Xbox, then I believe Jez, and if it's good news about Xbox, then I don't believe Jez.
Right.
And I suppose that's the whole thing about the same for you, right? You were saying earlier, where people just they take their clips and they take things out of context and they just believe what they want to believe at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's like people can believe whatever they want. I also think people don't account for the fact that, and this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but just that things change. You know, like they just can't wrap their minds around that. Even with the Xbox stuff, with like Phil said this and then he said this and Sarah said this and then she said this, and I'm like, well, yeah, that's embarrassing. That's why you should speak less. But things change. Like you're allowed to like something that was true. Like the Helldivers thing is a good example. Like when in April or May, when people are clipping me out in 2024, like I bet you it is true that the game wasn't going to come over. Like I think that happened later. Things change, but that's okay. Like it's what I say to you know, people behind the scenes in my company when they get upset about the way people treat them or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, people should treat each other nicely. Don't participate in it if you can, but also understand when you live by the sword, you die by the sword. If you're going to like put your opinions out there, then and you're going to like make prognostications, then expect to get cut down when you're wrong. Sure. Like that's just the way it goes. And I've been wrong about, that's what I was saying. Like it sounds like a really ridiculous thing, but I've been speaking about games for so long. It's like, dude, I was wrong about Vita. I was wrong about Mass Effect. I was wrong about, like, I was like, come on, man. Like I've been wrong about so many different things. It's like, it is what it is. I've been right about a hell of a lot more than I've been wrong about. Otherwise I would have been long not doing this. I mean, I would have been totally disreputed and put out the pasture, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so Rand, you asked about Black Myth.
Yeah, the Black Myth thing, yeah.
Yeah, like did you have contradicting information or was it just like
No, I never dug about that at all. I don't even know who I would ask about that. My theory, I remember now that you're talking about it, I remember this and I was like, yeah, what was the argument? And I was like, yeah, okay, that I do remember. It's simply, here's what I think happened. And you can, I don't know if this fits or not, because I think you and I actually kind of agree on most of it, is that, and the reason I was clicking around before, I didn't mean to be rude, was I was going on Moby Games for Black Myth just to see, because I was like, I don't think it's in the credits. But what I believe is that PlayStation helped them with the game to get it on PlayStation 5, and that there was nothing necessarily stopping Microsoft from doing the same thing. Like, if you wanted to do it, if you wanted to send people to China and you wanted to like sit down and really like nail this thing, then you probably also could have done that. And that was always my theory of the case. Is like, yeah, they simply got the game out for their console. There was nothing. I don't believe that they were like, you can't publish the game elsewhere. And the reason that I believe that is because there is no exclusivity agreement Sony would ever sign with a publisher or a developer where they would even mention Xbox, nonetheless blame the console openly for the reason why it's not coming out. Like that to me was the big signal where I'm like, there's just no way Sony would have a fucking meltdown about that behind the scenes if that happened. I think that Sony, if there's one thing Sony deserves an immense amount of credit for, and PlayStation deserves an immense amount of credit for, it's breaking open new markets. And they're just way ahead of the game. They're way ahead of everyone there.
They completely bodied Xbox in Europe. It's like I live in Germany like half the year, and it is a bloodbath. Nobody has Xbox here. Nobody.
Yeah, and you think about so China is like China, India, the Middle East, and Africa are the places that they're like really identifying now, and they have the hero projects in 3 of those places. They have a major deal with a Carry First, which is an African mobile company, and they're trying to do things there. Like they're really trying to pierce these different locations and make money. And Africa specifically is going to be vital because demographically, Africa is like in 50 years, their population is going to be huge, and everyone else's populations are declining. You want to be where people are, and of course, China and India, these markets with more than 1 billion people. So I think Sony was very aggressive in getting Black Myth Wukong to work on PlayStation because they're trying to sell games in China. And I think you and I agree. It's like I think Sony helped them, but I just think Microsoft could have also helped them. And I think the year and
sorry,
I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh,
no,
okay. I was going to say
this is why you like the cameras, right?
Yeah, I can't get your rhythms. I was just gonna say I think the reason it's coming out the day it's coming out is because they always do stuff on that date. That's why I'm just not compelled by that. Like everything they do on that date apparently isn't. I don't play those games, but that date is incredibly relevant in the lore of that world. So like when I saw that date, I'm like, dude, they like announced the game on that date. They showed the gameplay on that date. They like that's just the date they use. I don't think it has anything to do. But I'm actually way more compelled by them just acknowledging Xbox. Like there's just no way they would have done that. Like in my opinion. So I believe you're reporting, but I just wonder if a wire was crossed in that. It's like, well, conceivably we could have also done that. We just chose not to.
I've always maintained that even if it is true that there is an exclusivity deal, that it is on Microsoft to have gotten there first, right? So, well, I do believe my source in that there was some kind of preclusion there, or at least they told Microsoft that was why they weren't doing it, because that's the information my sources have. But I also think that like you, that it's still on Microsoft, and it's like, you know, they're the ones who are coming in from third place, so they're the ones who need to be more aggressive and need to compete for these games. And clearly they didn't identify Black Myth Wukong as something that was going to be the hit of the summer. I think if they had done, maybe they could have gone harder to acquire that thing, but I guess maybe we'll just never know.
That whole situation was weird, Colin, because you're right that Sony usually brags about the exclusives they have, or at least will be like, hey, 6 months before console or before it hits other console. But then Xbox acted strangely with that one too, because they were putting on press releases that, hey, we can't talk about other partner deals with other. So like they both were acting really differently than any other time before. So
there was probably some beef behind the scenes. I think that what's that game that's coming out later this year on PlayStation? It's like where winds meet.
With the winds, yeah.
Yeah. And when I saw that, which I think is a Chinese game, and when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is the way they usually talk about their console exclusives. Like it's all over the trailer. And so that's the weirdest part to me. And that's actually maybe the most vital part. We probably should have led with that, is like, why would Sony be not allowed to say anything about it? That doesn't even make any sense. Like that's if anything, you have to credit Microsoft for having a pretty sound PR strategy of creating incredible confusion around it. Like, whether or not it's true or not, it could have just been a strategy to create confusion. And so it's not, I don't like, especially because I like Jez, it's like, I don't want to have conflict with people where it's like, I don't believe this story or that. I think wires get crossed. I've gotten stories wrong in the past. People have told me things that have not panned out. I get it.
I've definitely been in that situation, and I can see that like the information could be across wire, because we're working across countries here, and maybe maybe Game Science didn't give Microsoft the accurate information, which is how it ended up coming to me, and I don't know.
Well, it's even like, and transition to the Xbox thing. It's kind of like the whole Chris String scenario earlier this week, where he said,
"Oh yeah,
Game Pass profitability doesn't include first party expenses or whatever he said, which blew up. And I know Colin came out there with the tweet being like, "Oh, I'm listening," because you've been very.
I love that meme. I love that meme.
Yeah,
that's like
you've
one of
been
my
very
favorite
out
memes.
there about Game Pass, and then everybody writes articles about it because I do think there is people are more often to click on negative news in general
I know that.
than positive stuff. So that wildfire everywhere, all the websites, all the YouTubers being like, they lied to us, blah, 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 blah. And then Chris pulled a retraction later the next day, complete 180, talking about the specifics of it, which didn't get as much pull, didn't get as much traction from websites. Which you think, if you're a journal with integrity and ethics, if you're putting on an article saying like this is what he said, then you should probably update the article and be like, actually said this, because if you didn't do that, then you're not a real like journalist or like have any right. I don't know. I've never been a journalist. I know you have at IGN and stuff, but I would imagine IGN would be like, okay, we need to correct this story and put an update out.
Of course. This is why I'm so happy that I do like a weekly podcast and don't really have to worry about having like takes. It's also why it was funny. Someone tweeted me, was like, "Are you going to retract your statement?" And I'm like, it was a picture of Donald Trump. I don't know if I can really retract it. I think you should be looking at the person who reported the information. I actually think, I don't know if you guys know Rick Hogue. He's a friend of mine. He's a lawyer.
Yeah.
And he's on our shows quite often, and he's like our game space kind of lawyer and an M&A lawyer. And I think he put it best about Chris String, which is, and this is kind of what I've kind of seen too, is he doesn't seem to really understand as much as he thinks he does, and he puts things out there. I think he put it, I think Rick said something like he gets this information but doesn't really know what to do with it, kind of thing. And yeah, so it's like it seems more, he used to work at GamesIndustry.biz, and I read that site pretty often, and he comes off more of like a stenographer than like a journalist per se, where I think that he reported that kind of incuriously without asking all of the right questions or having the proper context for it. So people should be mad at him. I think people should be mad at him, not the people that are reporting on what he said with definitive furor. Like, it's not, but I also understand that like you should correct the record. But the beauty of, again, doing the podcast once is, well, we wouldn't talk about this anyway because that has nothing to do with our show, but is like you can kind of just wait for the information and just see where things fall. Not everyone needs to have a take on everything immediately, but I just think he was probably told something he didn't really quite understand, to be honest. But who knows?
Yeah, it is kind of complex. The way Microsoft measures Game Pass success, which is, like, because when Chris put that out, I started asking my sources about how it's done, and the way Microsoft does measure success in the post Game Pass universe, where sales are being cannibalized, something they admitted to the FTC in court, that Game Pass cannibalizes retail sales. It is complicated the way they factor this in, and they use something called member weighted value, which is sort of, it's like an equation, a calculation of how many sales they believe have been cannibalized by Game Pass, and then they charge Game Pass revenue against that cannibalization back to the studio. So the studio gets what, like in Microsoft's internal studios, the studio gets what they would have got from retail sales out of Game Pass's budget, which obviously then hits, if the cannibalization is like extreme, like, which is probably going to be the case when Call of Duty launches. I think that's when we get scenarios where Game Pass suddenly has a drought, because it's like, oh well, all the Game Pass money's been vacuumed up by the Call of Duty member weighted value calculation, right? Which is why I think like Game Pass often seems to have. I remember this time last year, there was almost like, I think it was Tom Warren, The Verge. Was it, Rand? You might be able to correct me on this, but I think it was Tom Warren. He put out an article saying that, was it Tom Warren? It might have actually been Chris String. Actually,
I think if you're gonna where he was saying Microsoft was investing less in Game Pass, that was Chris String.
It was Chris String. Okay, well,
But, recently even
so,
Chris String said he had come out and said something like, I'm hearing that some publishers don't want to put on X, and then he came out with like a massive retraction on that too.
Yeah,
this
so
is what I'm
seems to
saying.
always
I think
be
this
like,
is. I think this is what people have been saying. Like Rick has been saying is like, I don't know this person personally. He did make fun of my Concord reporting. It's like, okay, I don't really know you, but people that have interacted with him, like Rick, I guess it's like he just doesn't. He says, I brought up the tweet. It says, my experience is that Mr. Dring, who blocked me during ABK, often doesn't quite know what he's hearing or looking at. I prefer that explanation over something more insidious. So I'll that's why I'm deferring to someone who knows him a little bit better.
What's the saying? It's the saying like never infer that something is done with malice when it can be just easily done with as ignorance or something.
Something like that. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I don't. He's probably a perfectly nice person. It's just like, this creates a lot of consternation, and I get it. It's whatever. It gets clicks and attention, and that's maybe what he's going for. I don't know. But it seems, so what you're saying is this guy reports a lot of stuff in your space inaccurately.
Well, I know Xbox fans don't like him because they'll say something and then it'll rile up the PlayStation fanboys and it'll cause like all the websites to write articles on it, and you'll get this like news cycle of, not that Xbox needs help with bad Xbox news lately, and then all of a sudden the retraction comes a day later, but then all the damage has been done, right?
Right. It's we've all been there. Like I'm sympathetic to. I've done things like that, and I'm sympathetic to it. But if he's doing it a lot, it's kind of like a pattern, I guess.
Well, it's kind of like why I think like there's often cross wires about Game Pass, because like if they are sort of vacuuming out some of the revenue from Game Pass to charge back to against individual studios' P&Ls, then it's kind of like, well, there will be droughts in Game Pass. And I think when Chris String put that article out, and apologies to Tom Warren for thinking it was Tom, but it is kind of like maybe there was just no money left that month because of chargebacks, and then and then Game Pass has had like a lot of recent hits with Blue Prince and Claire Obscure and stuff like that, and it's like they had this sprint of like high quality stuff because presumably they had more money to spend. And Sakana came out, MPD said that like gaming subscription spend is up for May, which presumably bodes well for Game Pass and stuff. But it is complicated the way Microsoft handles this, and I think there is, I want to believe that Microsoft obviously has their math correct. They know exactly how much, the average user will churn month over month, and presumably they will know how much money they've got to spend month over month. But I suppose it does open a question of like, is there clever accounting here to sort of hide away some of the downsides of this? Because obviously developers, the founder of Arcane, who founded Wolfeye Studios, which made Weird West, good game by the way. He said that he was quite vocal against Game Pass and its effect on the industry, and also you had Baldur's Gate, director of publishing, also speaking about it and its potential impacts on the way games are perceived more as maybe passive content like Spotify or Netflix rather than something people are passionate about, and maybe that has a chilling effect over the industry as well. So there is like multiple facets, I suppose, to Game Pass and whether it is a good thing or not. But yeah,
I mean, is it a good thing? Like, I think these are all individual questions, because the one thing I always say about Game Pass is that for the consumer, it's a great thing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And it's incredibly chock full of value, even on the PlayStation Plus side, which is way less compelling. I only have PlayStation Plus Essential. I don't want to rent games. Like I don't play games like that. Like I just said, I spent like a fucking month playing Death Stranding. A rental service doesn't work for me. I'd rather just buy the game and play it. But like my best friend, for instance, I gave him my PS4 Pro, and a while ago, a couple of years ago, and I sent it to him in California, and I sent him, just as a joke, like $100 bill, and I'm like, buy a year of PS Plus Extra. At the time was what it cost, and he loves it. Like he doesn't need anything else, right? I think he buys like the wrestling games and stuff like that, but he's like really into it. So it's like it's very high quality, high value. It's great, and Game Pass is even better. But I think that that's divorced from whether it makes sense financially and whether it caters to the way that most people play games. The reason I don't blame Microsoft for making the bet they did on Game Pass, even though I think they poorly executed on it, like we said earlier, is because it's a good idea. Like, but you're getting into situations where you really don't understand everything, and you can't possibly understand everything because no one's ever done anything like it before. And then the best example I use is, and it's not a great example, but usually media has trended towards digitization, right? So like we embrace music on Spotify. We like Netflix. I watch Sunday Pass football games through PlayStation, like shit like that. But one group of media, or one type of media that really resisted this, is books. And people thought that it made a lot of sense to put digital books out, like Kindle and everything. And there's a huge market for it to this day. But everyone thought that it would consume the way everyone read and consumed books, and ultimately you'd buy digital books and everything. But there were a lot of people like me 15 years ago that started to do that, and then like, you know what? I actually just like buying physical books and reading them. And I kind of think Microsoft might be experiencing a similar plateau with Game Pass, where like people experiment on something they think is a good idea, and over time they realize maybe there's not as much value here as I thought, because I'm not jumping around with these particular games. There's a game outside the service I don't want. I'm kind of locked into this thing. I don't own it when it's over. I just think it turned out to be so much more complicated. But I don't think that anyone could have known that, because no one had deployed an idea like that before. So you have to give them credit for trying. And I also think they probably could have executed on it better earlier, that it would have been much more sustainable. Because I think you and I talked about, and the three of us have talked about in the past, it's like once they reach that golden whatever number, then they're kind of, it's like Netflix reaching that number. It's like you're kind of in the clear and you're good. But they're nowhere in my mind's eye. It's like I don't really understand how it all works, because, and I find people's lack of curiosity about it generally a little weird, because I'm like, it's such a new and dynamic way to exercise the market in our space, that I'm surprised people aren't like really trying to probe a lot more deeply about how it all works. And I guess my greatest argument for it not working quite the way they wanted to is that I just don't believe that they would be doing what they're doing with publishing on other platforms if that was the case. There's no reason why you would want to undercut yourself.
Yeah.
You would want Indiana Jones to be only on Game Pass or on your platform. You want Starfield or whatever, these Forza. It's like the second that those games start migrating, it seems like they need to clean up the margins themselves. And so that's the biggest indicator that I think, and I've always said, like, money in, money out, I totally believe is profitable. But I just don't think that that's the full, that's arithmetic. That's not the equation.
So
the equation, like you're saying, is something different.
What do you think the future of Game Pass is then?
I don't know. Like I think it all ties into, all right, so like this next the rumors about the next Xbox, which you would know a lot more about than me. It's like, it seems like it's going to be a very pro-consumer device that tries to bring everyone over, give them the option to play their old games, have backwards compatibility, have the Game Pass thing, and then open themselves up to this other a la carte marketplace, and maybe others. I mean, if Steam's there, maybe Epic would be there, and so on and so forth. I have no idea. Game Pass seems to be stable, and maybe even slowly growing, probably on the back of PC.
Yeah,
but
it's all
I
PC
don't know
right
that it has. I just can it go much higher than 40 or 50 or 60? Like that. That's still not where they needed it to be.
I saw projections they had it up to 2032 at 120 million subs.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like, that's insane.
But I mean, you know, the big part that's missing from all of it is mobile. Like, it was vast majority of mobile, but like their mobile play has not even begun yet. And I think I think they thought it would have started by now. So I think the mobile, I never believed the mobile situation would ever really work.
Apple won't let it, man. Like Apple's eating fines left, right, and center from the EU rather than open it up.
Yeah, but when I remember seeing, and this isn't from the FTC stuff, this is from like even beyond, like later the FTC stuff. I had someone send me some documents and stuff, and I was looking at it, and I was like, well, that's very aggressive. But it was like mostly from the mobile stuff, and I'm just like, well, that's gonna really, if you can't start up a mobile store and get subscriptions based off of that, like that's gonna be hard to grow. I don't know. Like, I've listened to you talk about the Steam scenario on the next Xbox, and I've had conversations with people that aren't like us and do the podcasts and are always looking at things and trying to analyze and see what's going to go and all that stuff. And I've just talked to regular gamers, and some of them are just like, I don't care. Whatever gives me the best value for my money. I don't care if Game Pass is profitable or not. It doesn't matter to me. Like, there's just people that are just like, if it works for me, it works for me. I don't care if Microsoft is or isn't making money. I don't care that Microsoft is going to put out this device and, it's better for me. But like, as someone who is like 100% in on the Xbox ecosystem, who owns thousands of games, and thinking about like where the hardware goes from here, I'm like, okay, backwards compatibility is obviously a thing in my mind, being like my purchases, even though I'm a little different than a lot of people because I don't really replay games. So if Xbox were to announce like, hey, backwards compatibility is going away tomorrow on the next device, at first I'd be like, oh man, that sucks. But then eventually I'd be like, I get over it because I own so many games from the 360 gen. I've never replayed one. Once we got into the Xbox One generation, never replayed an Xbox 360 game, never replayed an OG Xbox game, never replayed a PS2 game. I'm just not someone who does that. I kind of move forward. I don't like look backwards, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm all digital. I know the physical game situation where I want to own your content, and that's great for people that want it, but I don't really particularly care too much about that. So, when I think about the Steam stuff and when those early rumors happened, my first thought was, okay, very much like I think you had mentioned, because I when we talk about this stuff on our show, I'm like, if I'm a developer and I'm making games for Xbox, and then the Xbox puts out a system that has Steam on it, why would I want to bother making an Xbox game? If Steam's already on this device and all these people could access it.
Right.
That was a question I had. I was like, I don't know how they're going to answer that dilemma. And then even for people that enjoy physical, are we looking at the next Xbox as not even having a physical disk drive? They've said backwards compatibility is going to be a thing. And I know it's tough to believe anything Microsoft says right now because of what happened with the layoffs and the cancelizations and all that stuff. But I mean, that was them and AMD coming out together. So I highly doubt they go back on that, where they, because it was specifically like, hey, back compat's going to be a thing, native back compat or whatever. But now you have people still wondering, well, is there even going to be a disk drive? Because Xbox is all about not selling systems nowadays without disk drive. So are you going to give up on that market? And then if there's a chance of you not essentially, everybody who buys this device may not spend money in that store, are you going to have a deal with Steam? But then why would Steam want to even have a deal with you?
Yeah, Steam's not going to cut a deal with
So Microsoft. It's like, how expensive? So it seems like you would have to be a profitable device from day one, which means probably pretty expensive. I mean, you already have the PS5 Pro at $700. We saw with the the Xbox prices where I think there's an Xbox Series X 2 terabyte system that's more expensive than the Pro right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. And in fact, people are saying, I don't know if you guys saw the reporting from, I don't have any, I'm not a manufacturing guy or whatever, but people are saying that pricing suggests that they're not even manufacturing the console anymore. Because they're now trying to maximize like the money in which they already have in the channels.
I mean, I think they're, for a long time, I think they've been kind of limiting supply or only producing as much as they want. I can't imagine, because I think you can still buy Xboxes pretty much everywhere. I could be wrong. I mean, I haven't really looked, but I think they probably aren't selling the Xboxes in other countries. Like, they're going to focus here. And I think that's probably the play for the future, where Microsoft's going to put out their own first-party hardware, and they'll focus on the US and the UK. And then OEMs might come in later and then try to sell like an Xbox, like an Acer Xbox console mini PC in Europe, because they can do that there. But I have a lot of questions. I mean, about that partnership and about doing that, because it has to be done right. Like, the implementation of switching stores or being able to do that stuff needs to be something that is really simple to do. It can't be something where it's like, well, I got to plug in my keyboard and mouse to be able to access it. Like, it has to look like a console, it has to perform like a console, and it's got to be intuitive enough to be able to switch to stores. And there's a lot of questions bound by it, and it's just, as much as I like the idea of it, because I do think it's a compelling pro-consumer device. Like, hey, any game anywhere, you can play it here. I just sort of wonder what's the upper limit on something like that, especially if it's really expensive. And if they don't sell enough of them, are you going to end up in a situation this would be the ultimate like death knell of like Capcom decided they're not making an actual Xbox game. They're just, hey, if you want the game on this console, buy it on Steam. You know, so I have all these questions about that stuff. Even though I'm looking forward to seeing what it is, and obviously they're not going to talk about it yet, but I was just like, that strategy either is going to pay off immensely in the future, where maybe people are looking for PCs and maybe Xbox can dominate the low-end PC market and do all these things, or you know, it's basically just not gonna do a whole hell of a lot. I don't know. I don't know how that's gonna all play out. You know?
Yeah, it's so it's interesting because I feel like this is such an existential crisis for the Xbox brand that they have to be doing it with their eyes wide open, knowing what it means. Because and it goes back to what you were saying. A lot of people saying, I don't care. Who cares if it works for them? Well, it doesn't. Because I was asking, like, how does Microsoft make any money doing this? It's like, well, I totally get the idea if you don't care about something, but if you're involved in the ecosystem, you better care, because this doesn't just happen and you're unaffected by it long term. Like, they're not going to just do things for fun. I read it as so weird that, like, it seems to me a play to let, and I hate to put it this way, but it's like, because I think ultimately PlayStation probably ends up in the same place, but just far in the future because there's so much more hardware dependent, is like kind of beginning the process of letting everyone down, right? Like, we're going to make this new hardware. It's going to play Xbox games. It's also going to have access to this new storefront. Like, in other words, a very pro-consumer move to like treat with care the tens of millions of people that Xbox has cultivated, while allowing them to kind of successfully segue into a different space, but then it's more of a Windows space, and Microsoft maybe monetizes you in a different way, but it's not quite as powerful. Because the ironic thing, Rand, is like, people often joke around about, well, oh, is PlayStation going to block their games from being played on this Xbox hardware? And I'm like, I'm not even sure that's possible, and I don't know why they would want to do that. The bigger question is Xbox going to block their content on Steam? You know, because now you're going to give people a piece of hardware and then allow them to go to Steam to buy it. Like,
that's a good point.
So you're like, it doesn't even make any sense. You know, and that's the thing about, that's what frustrates me, is like, what don't people get about this? Like, it is truly game over if they start giving people access to a different storefront. And you'd be foolish, in my opinion, to not buy the Steam version of every game if you had access to it, because you know Steam is more ubiquitous and is going to last longer. So like, opening that entire door up is so intentional, in my opinion, that they must know that what it's going to mean for them.
I don't know if you saw this. Jeff Grubb had put out a video about this when all the rumors were coming out. He theorized that this is a play by Microsoft with an eye towards regulation.
I did see that, actually. He responded to one of my things with that. I did see that video, and I think that's interesting, and it's a high intellect idea, but I think that depends on like a lot of things. Like, even with the FTC, like who's in the White House, like this can go one way or the other, really in a really major way. I don't think you make a play like that under the assumption that you're going to throw it into the courts and hope for the best, especially against companies, because it's not going to be Sony that they're going to have to deal with. You know,
it's Apple.
They're going to have to deal with Apple, right? And Epic and Google and all Nintendo, these different places. Yeah, it's gonna be, so like, if they want to get bodied and spend an enormous amount of money and maybe come out bloody at the other end. But I don't. So it's an interesting idea, but I've said, and I mean it, it's like, I really haven't heard a truly cogent way this works, like, for Microsoft, other than, again, the idea of just letting people kind of segue and retain them in some way, but not in the most meaningful way, which is on a platform level, but rather in sort of on an OS, or giving them that option. Of course, Game Pass will be there, and it'll always be really tantalizing. But that's the thing. That's what I always found so funny. It's like, so you're gonna log in and be like, I can go buy Indiana Jones on Steam and give you 30% less money right now. You're gonna give me that option? That's never been done before. It's never been. It's like it's unthinkable. Just like we were saying about other things. So, and the unthinkable often happens.
Part of me just thinks, like, it's getting access to Steam on the Xbox. Like, I can see it being there, but it's gonna be like people are gonna have to jump through hoops to get it or something. Like, maybe you have to boot into a desktop, connect a mouse and keyboard, and then manually install the shit and do.
And that's a failure right there. Because if you're gonna do it, it has to be done well. It has to be implemented well.
Yeah, but it's like that's the thing. Like, that's how the Steam Deck works. Like, Steam Deck, if you want to get like the Hoyoverse launcher, for example, to play like Genshin Impact, because it's not on Steam, you can do it. You have to go into Linux. You have to deal with Linux, and Linux is bullshit. And then you have to like install it and do all this, jump through all these hoops. Like, you can do it, but it's a ball ache to do it, right? You can get Battle.net on there as well if you don't want to, if you want to run World of Warcraft, but it's a ball ache to do it. So like, but I agree with you that it's like I can't see Microsoft intentionally making it difficult to do, but I also can't reconcile what Colin's saying, where it's like, yeah, we're gonna give away 30% to Steam and let you split the difference.
Maybe they want to just to have the easy transition of moving the console users into PC users on their own storefront, and this is like an easy bridge gap between that. Because I've been on record, I do think there'll be an X console, but I think that's the last console Xbox makes. So like when we get to what would be the PS7 generation, there won't be a new Xbox console from Xbox themselves. If there's hardware, it'll be from OEMs. So I think this upcoming Xbox console is the last one they make themselves. And then, but I've always said that, even going back, I was just like, who knows where this all goes? But like, if I had to make a bet, like, I know, like, you made a bet, I would bet $5,000 Helldivers 2 never come to Xbox, and then you're wrong. So, but I would say I'd bet $5,000 that this is the last Xbox-made first-party Xbox hardware. And maybe I'd be wrong on that. Because then you're getting into like, let's just imagine the next Xbox comes in 2027. You say normal generations, 7 years. You're looking at 2034, 2035. That's a long time from now. That's 10 years from now. Like, does cloud gaming make a jump in that time frame? How much does hardware cost, especially with all the tariff situation right now? And all the economic factors, like, I don't know, like, when you think of a PS6, how much do you even think a PS6 is going to start off at, Colin? Like,
oh my god, we were talking about that on Moore's Law is Dead, where I was like, dude, like, I'm not a hardware guy, but I'm like, you can't imagine it being cheaper than the Pro. That doesn't even make any sense. So
right, so you're looking at
be like 8, 9 at least. I mean, it is going to start becoming. That's what I was saying to him, is that I think it's funny you bring this up, Rand, because I was like, gamers typically have more money than I think the average media consumer, because they have to spend more. There's people might spend $50, $100 a month sometimes, or more on average, but there is a limit, and there is a sticker shock that is going to start to be applied that maybe hasn't been met yet, but will be met at some point, just based on inflationary cycles and stagnation of wages and all the rest. So the thing about the Xbox hardware that I think people are kind of missing, not you guys, because you understand it a lot more than most of the people that are tweeting at me or whatever, is if Xbox isn't selling games directly, it's over for the brand. Like, there's no reason for the hardware to even exist, because people are like, oh, they'll make money on the hardware. It's like, no, they won't. Maybe ROG Ally makes money because that company has, they can make $50 a unit or whatever it is. I don't know what the cost is, and they're a small company and they have small expectations, but Microsoft doesn't get involved in things for small expectations. They shut things down for way less all the time. So it's just such a bold and unusual move to say, like, yeah, we are going to really open this thing up. And to me, that just signals the end of the ability of the ecosystem to control the full scale of sales in and out of its ecosystem. People are just going to make other choices. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. But again, I understand why people don't care and they look at it as high value and pro consumer. That's all great. That makes perfect sense to me. I do care. I'm interested. I find people's lack of curiosity about things strange, because I'm super curious about how everything works. I love knowing how things work, how things operate, why they make sense. And certainly if I'm in an ecosystem and in an environment and I do something for a living, I'm especially going to be keenly interested in how it works. And we were talking about Game Pass earlier and the nebulousness of if it works or not. Like, this isn't nebulous at all. This doesn't work. Like, people on PC refuse to go to Epic Game Store and they give games away. They'll literally wait until the game is available. All they have to do is open a launcher. And they're like, no, I'll wait a year and then I'll buy it on Steam. It's like, I don't think, this idea of like choice, it's always going to, it's like Amazon. It's like always going to just fade towards this one thing. So I don't know. There's no good answers to it. There really aren't. Like,
I am so intrigued to know how this is going to work. Because I just, like, it just, on paper, none of it makes sense, you know. You move from having 100% of Call of Duty to 70% of Call of Duty. It's like, why, you know? But
unless they think they have a good 20 million user base, because I think, like, what are the sales projections of the Series X and S have it at like 35-ish, maybe it gets to 40 by the end. Maybe if they go in thinking, okay, if we can sell this at a profit and we get our 20 to million, the most hardest of the hardcore fans, and then, you know, to buy it, and maybe those people won't essentially use the system to buy games on Steam, and it's like those people are going to spend the money here, and they're our highest engaged users, so they're the ones that spend the most. Maybe that's, you know, their line of thinking, but obviously they haven't really talked about their next gen plans. All they've really said is like they want to win based on innovation. When, you know, Phil was on with Paris and Danny and Destin and Xbox Error Crew, you know, he said we want them to, you know, Phil was saying like, oh, we want them to, you know, pick us because the hardware's, you know, better and it's like more innovative. But what does that even mean? It's like, well, they can't really tell you what that means until they're ready to market this thing whenever it does come out. But I mean, it just is. It's if you would have told me at the beginning of this generation that with, you know, what, obviously we didn't know COVID was going to be a thing, but I think COVID helped the sales of the consoles. I know PlayStation and Xbox were supply limited in the beginning, but if you would have told me coming off the Xbox One gen into the Series X and S, which I think are much better hardware devices than the Xbox One was and the Xbox One X, that we were going to go into the Xbox Series X and S gen with a $500 Series X and a $299 Series S, I was like, there's no way they're selling less than the Xbox One. I mean, you got a $299 system right off the get-go. That's going to appeal to all X, Y, and Z number of people to be able to get in the next gen. And then it didn't. It's going to come in underneath it. And I would imagine they had stronger or better plans or better projections for it. Part of me wonders, you know, how much of 2022 really hurt Xbox, Colin, because that's when they delayed Redfall and Starfield. Because it felt like, to me, people were willing to give Xbox a second chance with the start of the generation, even though they didn't really launch with much. It was like Gears, the Gears RTS, and they have Hidebusters, but they didn't really launch with the amount of exclusives that PlayStation had in the beginning. But they were selling out, and I don't know if you remember, at least here in the States, they outsold PlayStation for like 2 quarters, because Satya was very much out there being like, this is the best-selling Xbox. We have actually been the number 1 seller for 2 quarters in a row, and it really seemed like the line was moving up, right? They'd purchased Bethesda, and that purchase had come in 2021, and Game Pass seemed to be thriving. The hardware sales seemed to be on the up and up, and then the opportunity came to buy ABK. Based on all that, it was like, okay, now we get ABK, we get Call of Duty in Game Pass, check mark, we get Blizzard for PC, check mark, we get King for mobile, check mark. Man, it check marks all the boxes. And we're selling out of consoles, and Game Pass is blowing up. This is gonna take us to the next level. And then the deal took way longer than I think anybody anticipated. And then 2022 happened, where it was supposed to be Starfield and Redfall, Pentiment and Grounded, and then Starfield and Redfall got delayed, and it was just Grounded and Pentiment, which I know you love Pentiment, but like Pentiment didn't have any mass appeal to anyone.
It's so good. I love that. I platinumed it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and it just, and then for some odd reason you couldn't get a Series X that holiday, and it was just only the Series S, And PlayStation had countered with like Horizon that year and Gran Turismo 7 and God of War Ragnarok. And it seemed like ever since then, people that year were like, yeah, it's the same old Xbox. We're out. And it doesn't really seem like they ever recovered. And even in the FTC emails with Phil, he called 2022 a disaster. And so like you're committed to spending all this money on ABK, which is a lot. And maybe when we were talking about the acquisition at the time, sure, Call of Duty is going to remain, multi-platform and maybe most of ABK, but I wasn't thinking at the time that it would make them become multi-platform down the road, and it just sort of seemed like it all like kind of dovetailed from there. Like the arrow started pointing down and down and down and down, and then Game Pass didn't grow or was stagnant. The hardware sales started to go in the opposite direction. And then like Starfield came out, which I think was like a big moment, but then it seemed like Starfield didn't do, at least critically, even though I loved the game, it didn't critically kind of hit the numbers that Elder Scrolls did. And then all of a sudden you're third party, which I had started hearing rumors about that. They announced it in February. I started hearing rumors about that in November of 2023. And I was like, what? No way. I don't, I was like, really? Like, but they just said they went to the FTC and the whole argument was about why we should have, it was a, how did this like turn so quickly? So like in my mind,
Satya came out and was like, you want competition? Let us have competition, or something like that.
I don't know. It just really seemed like to me 2022 is I like kind of have a dot, and I'm like, that is when it all kind of went all downhill. And it was just, then you get to the situation where it was like, hey, we spent all this money. And I've said, even though like there was a couple websites and forums that quoted me, like I talked to Satya or something, and I had said, I bet you if Satya could do it all over again, he wouldn't have bought ABK. He would have used that money for AI, which is partially, or fully, depending on who you ask, like the catalyst for them laying off so many people at Microsoft is because they're trying to build out this $80 billion infrastructure. And, if you had the money from ABK that I don't know. What do you think about all that? Like, is it, because ABK made sense in 2022 when they were doing it, but then everything went down, and then it was like, okay, well, this isn't, we got to do, I don't know, man. Like, it's just, the more I think about it, it was just like that year just sticks out to me.
So this is, again, what we were talking about, like not engaging with people that just give you grief and fucking bust your balls all the time, was whatever. Is like, it's because you're never going to get credit for all the things you got right. And like, no one's going to come bust down your door for that. And I called this kind of from the beginning, where I was like, this is a huge mistake. Like they shouldn't do this. They're going to become too big, and they're going to get too much focus on them. Like buying, I really truly believe that buying Activision Blizzard is like what undid everything.
See, Jez would say buying ABK is the only thing that keeping Xbox alive right now.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, maybe that might literally be true now because they're so heavily invested.
I just said I agree with myself. It's getting late here. Okay.
Yeah, like to me, I feel like it's funny because you can imagine a different situation where there wasn't so much financial pressure on them and they had everything else going, like Bethesda and everything, plus maybe a couple other assets they had purchased along the way, and things might be working a lot better. The kind of ironic and shitty part about this situation for Microsoft is things are kind of starting to work better now. Like things are gelling better. Game Pass has been really impressive. The releases are starting to come out, but now it's kind of too late. And they didn't execute on it quickly enough. I think that they overpaid for Activision, first of all. And I also think, that you're right in that, like, they were almost, the universe was almost begging them to walk away, like by it taking so long and giving them time to think about it. And I just don't think that it was a deal that really needed to be done. But I just thought it was crazy that people thought it was going to happen, and then like all these games would be exclusive. I mean, that's something that I called from the very beginning, where I'm like, there's no way they spend this much money. Like these games are never going to be exclusive. Like, the cost of making Call of Duty is fucking crazy. Like there's just no way they can make that.
There's just no way. There's just no way. Like even without asking anyone, it was just clearly that was clearly like a service revenue play, and like especially you don't want to cut your legs off with with Call of Duty. That game makes a lot of money, but it's insanely expensive to run. It's crazy expensive to make.
And the other thing that I think is important is that I think that money is very powerful and people can be bought very easily. But if you look at future M&A decisions, it's like it's all going to be done under the guise of some of these places really getting gutted after Microsoft bought them, and shutting down studios and canceling games, and people are going to be less eager to join the family. That's why they should have taken smaller bites. And tried to manage them better. But now they're at a maximum size. They really don't need to grow. If anything, they need to shrink more because they have too many studios and too many things going, even for Game Pass, where once you get all these games coming out, a couple a quarter or whatever, that might satiate the demand along with third-party deals and legacy content and all the rest. So I just think that was the Activision deal is what is really what undid everything. And it brought, isn't it the most expensive deal they ever made up to that point?
It was the most expensive Microsoft acquisition ever.
Isn't it the most expensive tech acquisition ever?
That might be true. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of money, man, and that's going to bring so suddenly Xbox is like a curiosity within Microsoft to like a major focus, and that's why again I think that Phil and Sarah and Matt sound like they're contradicting each other all the time, and people are making fun of the things they used to say and whatever. It's because I just don't think they have any power anymore. Like I think they're like figureheads. I can't even believe they're still there personally, but I think they're at best figureheads that are making decisions that the board and Satya and others have been telling them to make because their bets didn't necessarily pan out. And again, I'm just mystified. I don't like playing around with people's jobs. It's a serious thing. I'm sure Matt Booty's a very nice person. I've never spoken to him or met him, but he's the one where I'm like, damn, dude, like, what do you know? Like, what? Like, people always joke about that. It's like, do you have like dirt? People like, what is going on here?
The Matt Booty thing, because Jez can attest to this. I always said, like, I'm not sold on Matt Booty.
Yeah.
A lot of the release when he took over, I was like, okay, I'll judge you based on Hellblade 2 and Avowed and the Obsidian stuff and South of Midnight and like the projects you shepherd, and like getting into the cancelizations and the layoff stuff is like Everwild, project that announced in 2019, 2025 still has nothing. Initiative, 7 years. Part of me is like, I get it. If you want to just like put on the unfeeling business cap, and you look at where do we need to cut costs here. I mean, the Initiative in Perfect Dark is an easy. We got to get rid of you. You don't have anything that we can sell, so we're not making money off of back catalog sales. You already here at 7 years. Probably still need another 10 years to make a game. You aren't Rocksteady.
It's
so it's
crazy.
like, if you look just like, all right, we need to cut. It's like, yeah, you're going to cut projects that are long in the tooth. But then I would argue, why were they allowed to be so long in the tooth? Why was Initiative and Everwild having those problems in the first place? Does that speak to leadership at those individual studios, the creative directors on those teams, the leadership style that Microsoft or Xbox employs? So I think Matt Booty has kind of that the vibe of a rich uncle, right? He'll if you want more time and more money, he'll give it to you. But if you want direction and help, I'm not sure that's like, because if you watch like the Double Fine documentary, it's kind of the vibe he was giving off.
I mean,
if you want guidance and direction, you're not going to get it from Matt Booty, but you'll get extra time and more money. And because I don't know if you remember, but during the 360 generation, they were criticized for being too hands-on with their studios. They were meddling too much in the product, and I think because of that, okay, we're going to pull back. We're going to let the developers create. Matt Booty gets the position, I think 2018, 2019, partially because, maybe mostly because, he took Minecraft from 20 million sales before Xbox bought them to 200 million or whatever it is now, like the biggest IP in gaming, which, he was in charge of Minecraft. So it's like, all right, you can see why, okay, we want you. You shepherded our, and that's partially the reason why Phil has any pull with Satya. Because I don't know if you know this, like Phil had to go over his boss's head to get them to buy Minecraft. Because Phil's boss at the time, Terry Myerson, because Xbox was underneath Windows, didn't want it because he was strangling the budget so much at Xbox because of the failure of the Xbox One, the early Xbox One stuff, that, you know, they used that to basically stop funding Xbox and the projects, because you can tell by after the certain original announced games, like the Quantum Breaks and all that stuff, like the back half of the Xbox One generation didn't have a lot, is because when they failed initially, they used that as an excuse of like, okay, let's wind this down, let's cut the budget. So like, even though Microsoft, you know, Xbox is part of Microsoft and they have, you know, access to millions and trillions of dollars, Xbox was still underneath the Windows division at that time. And then Phil had to go over Satya's, over Terry's head to get the Mojang deal done with Satya, and it became so successful that Satya was like, okay, what else do we need to do? And it took some time, and then they moved Xbox out from underneath Windows in 2017. Phil became vice president, and then all of a sudden you started seeing the investment in Xbox. Because I remember talking at the time, I don't know how much longer Xbox is going to last. I thought it was going to end right there, because some of the stuff I was hearing behind the scenes was not good. But then somehow Phil convinced Satya, we're going to do Game Pass, we're going to do cloud gaming. So his two loves, subscriptions and cloud gaming. I mean, his one love now is AI, but back then it was those two things. We sold Xbox on those two things, got the investment, bought those studios, and then, you know, Bethesda became available again, which they originally were up for sale even earlier from that, and then the deal went through, and then they bought them again the second time it went through. Or basically, Bethesda was almost sold before, but this was this. Eventually, in 2020, it went through, but they tried buying them even previously, and then like everything started looking up, and then like ABK stuff, and so, God, I don't even know. I'm rambling. I don't even know where my point was. I kind of went off all over. What was I talking about, Jess?
We were talking about like, I mean, for me, like the key aspect of what you're talking about here is that we were talking about Matt Booty and
Matt Booty's
ability to deliver. I think the industry's evolved so much in a rapid period of time. You know, like to what Colin said earlier, for example. You said that that Microsoft's gaming segment has become too big. I mean, all the things that we've seen happening, it could just be a case of Microsoft itself is too big. You know, like if, you know, when we talk about Sony and Sony having, I think you said, Colin, it's 10,000 employees, something like that.
Yeah, it's PlayStation has 10,000 employees.
Yeah, PlayStation. You know, PlayStation isn't thinking about like, oh, we need to hyperscale data centers for artificial intelligence. They're not making those decisions because they're focused on a specific segment of a market. Whereas Microsoft's like, we want to try and do everything all at once. And, you know, we had like COVID happen, which upset a lot of things. And then they dumped all that money into Activision Blizzard because they probably, like one bad mother in chat says, they overestimated the industry health. And I think there was a lot of hype at the time in gaming stocks because they were like, well, how long's a pandemic going to last? Everyone going to be stuck at home forever? Is gaming going to be the one industry that sort of, survives out of all this entertainment stuff? And then they had an opportunity to buy ABK, and now it's like, oh, now we've got AI to invest in. So like, on Matt Booty, I just kind of like, I want to play devil's advocate a bit and just sort of be like, I think Matt Booty's he's working against the tide here, because like, whereas like Phil has political clout to sort of push things through, I think in some regards, I don't necessarily think Matt Booty does, you know, not being like a long tenured Microsoft alumni potentially. You know, Matt Booty came in from Midway and stuff like that. I think I really genuinely think Matt Booty's had the cards stacked against him, and I think, you know, but it's also like, you know, you have, if you're in a leadership position, you have to own the successes and the failures, right? I don't know.
The buck has to stop somewhere. This is what I always say about Herman Hulst, where like Shuhei Yoshida was an exceptional leader of Sony's first party, and you saw that trickle into the PS5 generation even after he stopped, even after he was for some reason moved off of doing that after being so successful for so long. And so games like Returnal and the Horizon sequel and the God of War sequel and all these things were his games that he greenlit and shepherded, even Helldivers. And you see a much less successful Herman Hulst, and you have to kind of wonder how much of it was his decision, how much of it was kind of Jim Ryan and the board driving this games as a service strategy, and these kind of ill-timed purchases of studios, and just these poor investments in products that clearly weren't going to work out. I mean, Concord, they spent so much money on Concord, and it was so clearly not going to work, and they had so many big, as I've said on my own show, like so many big plans for it, and like the things that they were going to try to do, and like what they expected from it, and none of it
that Amazon
came to fruition.
TV show, right?
Yeah, that was as I understand, like I'm trying to remember, like it's been so long since I even talked to anyone about it. It's like that I think was supposed to launch like a content pack or like a new character or something that was supposed to then enter the game, and it was what my source told me when I reported about it last year was they looked at it as a product apparently with like a Star Wars level potential for them. And
that is crazy.
And you can tell, like, it's so funny, like, people bust balls about it, but it's like, you can tell they made decisions and they kind of backed off at the end because it wasn't working. Like, games don't just get their own controllers, Games don't get activations in an Amazon show. Like, things that you have to kind of put into place early. And they just really, I think, pulled back heavily on that. You can even see, remember when it was really funny, like, there was, like, the plaque that was going around that was being sold from the studio.
Yeah.
And it's like game studios don't do that for their people. That usually people do that. They get that shit made themselves. So you can tell like there's little hints that they believed in it a great deal. And obviously I reported on Sacred Symbols is that I know someone that played Fair Games in the closed alpha, and it's called Project Hearts, and it's not supposed to be very good. Obviously they have time to figure it out. This is one person's opinion. Yeah. But I bring this up because I think the buck has to stop with someone, and it stops with Herman Hulst. And I think that's why I think a lot of this, when they promoted, when Hiroki Totoki stepped back, Jim Ryan left, Hiroki Totoki was in there for a minute as kind of a stopgap, and then he went back to Sony corporate, and they brought Hoshino in, and they brought in Herman Hulst as co-CEOs. I thought that in and of itself is weird. There are a couple of companies. I went and looked. There were like 2 other companies on the Fortune 500 that have co-CEOs, but it's like a very unusual corporate structure for big companies. And then I think that they started to realize that maybe, and this is just my prognostication, of course, but Herman Hulst as the head of first party was really certainly one of the driving forces, if not the driving force behind a Bungie acquisition, a Firewalk acquisition, a Haven acquisition, the idea that Marathon was going to be huge and big, the idea that Concord was going to be huge and big, spending all this money on all these different games that ended up getting canceled, The Last of Us Online and the mismanagement of Naughty Dog. And I think they probably suddenly realized, like, oh shit, and that's why they left him as a CEO, but now he reports directly to Nishino. And a lot of people didn't realize that. I'm like, damn, dude, that was probably pretty embarrassing. They just announced this like 6 months ago. And now they're already being like, nah, never mind. And you have to ask questions of like how people remain in positions of power at both of these companies. But let me back up. People always talk about like, oh, people should take pay cuts and do the kind of Awada thing of, eating shit so no one gets laid off. And I'm like, it's really not about that. Like all the executives not taking money anymore and stuff like that is not going to solve the bigger systemic problems that there are people in charge of parts of these companies that truly do not know what they're doing. And I'll defer to you on the Xbox side and Matt Booty and the position he's in, but it does feel to me that there were certain people at Sony that knew what they were doing, and those people are no longer, or at least weren't in charge anymore. And a lot of them are smaller names that people wouldn't know, like Connie Booth is a really great example. One of the quiet producers and shepherds of some of the greatest PlayStation games of all time, ignominiously shown the door. And then David Jaffe reports this as big news, and everyone's, who the fuck is that? What is that for? Who cares? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, she's like maybe one of the 3 most important people on the creative side at Sony ever.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because a lot of the people who were laid off from Microsoft are people in that job role, that producer role. So like some of the most prolific layoffs are people who've been responsible for like some of the actually like highly successful games, you know. And part of me just wonders like why are those people being laid off, right? Like why lay off
Presumably because
content?
they're the most expensive, sadly. You know?
Yeah, I
mean,
guess that's part of it, but I don't know. I
I guess
mean,
were you surprised by the layoffs or the cancellations? I mean, we sort of knew at least some layoffs were happening end of the fiscal year and stuff, but did anything take you by surprise when Xbox had their announcements about what was going on?
yeah, like the initiative doesn't surprise me. It's so funny, man, because I'm good friends with a few people in Insomniac, and one of the guys is Drew Murray, who was the co-director of Sunset Overdrive and Resistance. And
he's one of the first people I've ever met in the industry.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and it's funny. Like I used to go to dinner. I lived in Santa Monica for 3 years, and I went to dinner with him one night, and I was talking to him, and I was like, "Hey, did you know about this new studio that like Xbox founded?" And he's like, "No." I was like, "Yeah, it's like the initiative." And then he ended up like on my word looking it up, and then ended up going there for a few years. And so I always think about that, where I was like, "Oh," and then he ended up going back to Insomniac. I think he's working on Wolverine, maybe. So it's funny, like I have a strange personal connection to that place, but obviously they never put out a game. I'm surprised by some of the Sony studios that have survived, specifically Media Molecule. So it's surprising. It was a little surprising that they were still going. I actually thought Perfect Dark looked pretty cool. It was one of the few games that Xbox. That's the big thing for me is like I'm excited that people get to play these Xbox games on more platforms if that's what they're into. But I'm not looking forward personally to that many of them. But that Perfect Dark game was definitely one of them, so that's too bad for me. I was most surprised probably about Turn 10, as I said earlier. I don't pay very close attention to Forza, obviously, but I just thought it was bigger and more important than that. And to
me, that's the least surprising one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't know, because I guess maybe I've been conflating in my mind for years now that Playground and Forza Horizon and Turn 10 and Forza Motorsport kind of had an equivalent thing going. And I guess I didn't, and I thought they were both big, I guess, in my mind.
No.
So I know that Forza Horizon 5 is like a whole nother level of player base, like in the 30 millions or something. I don't think any of the games got to that point, but I just thought it was like a bigger thing than that. So as an outsider, I was a little bit surprised by Turn 10, because I just thought that Forza was more important to them than that. And I think it's a fairly important place to be in the sim racer space, in my opinion. There's a lot of money to be made there, a lot of licensing opportunities, very attractive globally. I mean, you're talking about European audiences, East Asian audiences, and the things that Sony needs to court more. Or I'm sorry, Microsoft needs to court more. So anyway, that was as an outsider, that was surprising to me. I guess the bigger thing is like, there seems to be like a lot of, I don't know, man. I don't want to speak out of turn, but it's like, I'm most curious about what's going on with Bethesda Game Studios and like the Elder Scrolls, and like what's taking so long. How do you buy a label like Bethesda and not immediately get Fallout games going? And I know that that's a rumor now, but this has been like what, 5 or 6 years of this. Yeah, I just feel like there seems to be a lack of urgency, I guess, out of those teams. And what ones were most surprising to you? Because I know that a lot of teams had cuts, but I don't think any of them were really closed except for a couple of them, right? So
I mean, me and Rand, like we talked about it on Discord, because obviously Jason Schreier, Bloomberg reported there was going to be layoffs. Me and Rand had a back and forth, like talking about crap that might cut studios, and I think we talked about Compulsion, because the expectation was that South of Midnight didn't do that well,
and they just shipped the game. So
and they just shipped the game, so like maybe they got nothing to work on, and maybe it's an easy way for Microsoft to save some money. I think we'd also talked about Turn 10 shutting down because Forza Motorsport didn't do that well. And
Forza Horizon is just like so far beyond Forza Motorsport at this point that it sort of seems like redundant.
I get that.
We also talked about what was it, Ninja Theory, because Hellblade 2 didn't seem to do that well, and is there a market really for walking simulators?
Then it was, but then I sort of pushed back on that because from all accounts, Ninja Theory is a profitable studio because they rent out their motion capture studio that they built. Well, so it seems like on their P&L that they're profitable. So it seemed like
they've got a high-tech facility. They've got a really high-tech facility in the UK, and all Microsoft studios use it. So
I was the one that shocked me.
I don't think either of us mentioned the initiative when we were talking about that.
Well, no, because at the time, like, so when I told you when the reporting came out about Everwild, because at first I was like, oh, the Turn 10 situation I can see because head of Xbox Game Studios was the former studio head of Turn 10. It was Alan Hartman. And so I was like, okay, well, he's now gone. He retired. So I'm like, Turn 10's probably going to get hit because they don't have any more political protection, right? Craig Duncan, who was the head of Rare, became head of Xbox Game Studios. So in my mind, I thought to myself, he's going to protect Rare as much as he possibly can. Maybe almost kind of like how Herman Hulst protects Guerrilla Games, right? Mm-hmm. So in my mind, I was like, Everwild's probably safe. Plus, Phil just talked about it 3 months ago on a podcast where he's like making good progress, all that stuff. So I felt him coming out and saying that, and then the head of Rare being head of Xbox Game Studios, I was like, they probably have the political protection to get it done. Mm-hmm. So when they canceled that game, I was like, oh, okay. I was like, well, then Perfect Dark has to be next. Because now if you're canceling projects that are long in the tooth and that have issues, potentially, then you got to look at the initiative because it's in, Santa Monica, which is super expensive, 7 years already. They had to partner up with Crystal Dynamics. I was like, okay, that's the one that hurts me because, like you, we don't get a lot of stealth games. We don't get a lot of Deus Ex games, that give off that vibe anymore. Because I feel like people don't have patience anymore for that type of stuff, which is odd thing to say considering like Death Stranding 2 is all kind of about patience because you're walking to deliver things, but that's Kojima. And so I was like, that's the one that was like surprising was the Rare thing because I thought they had political protection. And then like they announced like the ZeniMax cancellation of their MMO because I brought it up to Jez on the podcast. I was like, you can't sustain Rare based off of Sea of Thieves forever. And Everwild was supposed to be their next game. And I don't know if they have another game that they're incubating, but Sea of Thieves ain't gonna. It's not Fortnite, right? I know maybe they can still bring the game to the Switch too in the future and maybe get a boost there. But at some point, you're going to have to put out another game. And this was supposed to be it. And then with the ZeniMax MMO thing, it's like, I know Elder Scrolls Online does well, but they've been working on this game for 6-7 years. And like, it was supposed to be the next game for them. And they'd have both those games working in tandem. But now you cancel it. And there's like, now I'm sort of thinking, I'm like, oh, what does the future of those two studios hold now? Because I don't think you can, Elder Scrolls Online is not going to last forever either. And then, you mentioned earlier about Last of Us 2 sales and how many sales it picked up during the TV show when it was on. And my first thought was also, man, there's some missed opportunity with Fallout.
Oh, totally.
Like the Fallout TV show, I think you can maybe even make an argument that it's bigger than the Last of Us TV show.
It's certainly better received cumulatively, I think, critically.
And it's like, and I know they have the Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, so it's not like there's not, but man, it sure would have been nice to have a new Fallout game available around that time.
I really think like when it comes to criticizing Matt Booty or first party output, not having a plan in place for Fallout is unfucking forgivable. Like, and I'm not just saying this as a Fallout fanboy, but it's like how are you gonna have a franchise like Fallout and not have and like have a TV show that's actually genuinely good and not have an immediate on-ramp to speak of? Like, I know that Fallout, like even Fallout 1 and 2 did like extra numbers because of the TV show. But like if you had like a Fallout, even a Fallout 3 remake or remaster in the vein of Oblivion or like a Fallout 5, something like that. But I suppose it's like, it's when you sort of studios want to branch out and try new things creatively. That's why Starfield even exists, I suppose, right? But I don't know. I would have spun up another team for Fallout if it was me.
Yeah, you think unless like Todd was so being like no, and it's like we're not doing it because he is on record saying he doesn't like really other teams playing in his playground, right? And they just maybe acquiesced to his wishes. Or maybe they didn't think the Fallout TV show was going to be super big. I mean, like they had the Halo TV show and that didn't do anything by any stretch. So maybe they were like, oh, maybe the Fallout TV show is not going to be good. We'll, curry favor with Todd. And then it becomes this massive thing. And I just wonder if it's like, well, fuck, Todd's not going to be able to get to Fallout 5 until I always joke with Maddie when I talk to him about this. But like, hey, how old are you going to be in 2035 when Fallout 5 comes out? Right? Because that seems how long it's going to take to come out. Because it's like Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Okay, maybe it comes out in 2028, but then it's like you work on Fallout 5, and it's like you're in the early 2030s at that point. Is the TV show even on anymore? Have you missed your window? So I know the reporting has come out that there are multiple, Fallout projects in development, like the Fallout 3 remaster. Maybe Obsidian's doing a Fallout New Vegas 2. Maybe there's even another Fallout project. But it does seem like if you want to point to like you missed the boat on this, at least initially, then you definitely missed it on Fallout, and that's something that you probably should have been like 2021 when you had full control of Bethesda. It's like, okay, what are our plans here? And if someone had told you, well, we don't plan on releasing a Fallout game for 12 years, I'd be like, well, no, we need to change that. Like because that just seems like not
it's a no-brainer, right?
Leadership planning at that point, because you can make the argument like Fallout's bigger than Halo at this point. You can make the argument that Forza is bigger than Halo, or even Gear, and I honestly think they are, especially. Well, yeah, okay, maybe I'm just saying it's like, but you don't have anything to, piggyback off the TV show's popularity. And I know, like my sisters who like they love they know nothing about Fallout, and it's like, hey, watch this show. They binged that in a day. And now they're just like, I'm like, when's the new season coming to Fallout? I'm like, it's coming soon. And they're like, are the games? Now they're asking me about games, and they don't play games. It's like, are the games any good? I was like, yeah, well, probably not up to your speed, but there's probably a ton of interest in the Fallout universe and the video game sphere. And it's just, is Fallout 76 a really good first impression if someone really wants to jump on Fallout or one of the older games? It definitely seems like a gigantic miss by people at Xbox for not planning for that outcome.
Yeah,
for sure.
It is what it is. But
I know that pissed off Maddie. The ZeniMax cancellation.
Oh yeah,
it really
definitely
did not. Because it doesn't really seem like Xbox has really done Bethesda a lot of favors. A lot of layoffs have come from Bethesda. I mean, they shut down Tango. Well, they tried to sell Tango. They couldn't sell Tango. They shut them down. Then they were able to find a buyer for Tango. And then they folded in Roundhouse into ZeniMax, which is like, okay, we got more people to build out this new game. And then you just cancel the new game, which apparently Phil loved and the executives were super, super impressed by, but only to then get rid of it. And I understand, like, at some point, it's like, well, you got to ship a product. You can't sit on it forever. It's costing too much money. And is it going to be a success? And I mean, from what the game sounded like it was going to be super cool.
I think this is like oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But it's like what Colin was saying about nah, it's gone. Sorry.
you forgot where. Yeah, it's like me when I was ranting and I just completely forgot my point. So like the future of Xbox, Colin. I know this is a dangerous topic for you to, because I'm sure you'll probably not say a lot of nice things about it, but what does the future of Xbox look like to you? Do you expect more cancelizations? Do you expect more studios shutting down? How do you see, the handheld space with the ROG Ally, the next console? Like, what does the future look like?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's one more console, and again, I think that all companies kind of coalesce into the same space ultimately of a more digital, potentially cloud-based future where things are just app-based, and so everyone's kind of just on the same hardware. I think that that's potentially true, and I know there are a lot of people skeptical, by the way, about the problems of physics and the speed of light and all of that ever really being overcome. But I think that technologies are amazing. You can build data centers and farms everywhere and kind of at least feed localities content from afar. So I think we're all going to end up in that same place. But I think Microsoft certainly gets one more Xbox out. And it's, as I said earlier, I think that they're slowly going to try to manage what audience they've maintained in the tens of millions and segue them into more Windows-based PC players, giving them more options and at least retaining them in some way, as opposed to probably inevitably slowly bleeding and losing most of them. And then you give people Game Pass as an option. And I think there's a bright future. I mean, you see numbers like what Microsoft's pushing with the Circana data today with numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it's like, including games that are old. And you're like, well, the third-party stuff, I think, I would just assume that most Xbox games beginning in 2026 will come out at the same time on multiple platforms.
Yeah.
Just to, like, I think they look at Forza and they're like, this is awesome. Now, like, what does it mean if we release the next one at the same time? I mean, like, that's only going to be huge for us. So, like, that's what I see leaning into third-party publishing more. Maintaining Game Pass is a high-value proposition. Threading the needle with their audience, trying to get them to the next platform and then giving them options. And I think it's a very pro-consumer look, as opposed to, it's like Sega Saturn porting people over, or even Dreamcast would be a better example, and like courting people over 12 or 13 million people, and then they just pull the plug. And I remember, because I had a Dreamcast, it's like, one day in April 2001, they're like, no, it's over now. At least people will have access to, hopefully, to their old games, and there'll be a lot of solutions, maybe emulation solutions, to have access to those games and the option to buy them from Microsoft, maybe. But I think if they go down this road, then it introduces, like I said, major storefront problems, and ultimately just coalesces people around Steam. But they maintain them on the Windows platform, and I guess that will be valuable in its own way. So I think what we understand Xbox as continues to change and morph into something more agnostic. And I just think they flew too close to the sun with the Activision thing, and I think that's what really kind of pushed them over.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the gaming handheld space, the PC gaming handheld space?
Do you own one?
Do you think that's?
Do you own any?
It's like my question was going to be like, do you think that's primed to explode? Because if you would ask like the companies, they'd be say a couple years ago that segment was zero because nobody was there.
Right.
And now it's multiple millions, even though most of it comes from Steam. Do you think that gets out of its niche at some point, and I don't know, maybe you get up to the 50 millions of like gaming PC handhelds, or do you think it'll just kind of remain that smaller segment?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, the smaller segment, because I do think people vastly overestimate how big it is. And it's entirely likely that Switch 2 has already sold more units than the Steam Deck, for instance. Although they're way different pricing, to be honest, to be fair. I don't play PC games, really. I mean, I play my team's games on PC because that's how we build them or whatever. So I play builds there, but otherwise I really don't play PC games. But it might actually ironically require a company like Sony or a Microsoft to really make these kinds of devices more ubiquitous. They have, the reason that I think Steam Deck specifically has been hamstrung in some sense is because Steam doesn't really go out of or Valve doesn't really go out of its way to sell them. And you have to kind of go to them and know what it is and find it. You're not going to stumble upon one in a Target or something,
Yeah.
And so I think it would probably do better if more people knew about it. But I also think PC players have very unique needs and wants. A lot of them are about fidelity. A lot of them are about, their setup and their station and their multiple monitors and their keyboard and mouse and all those things. And there's just nothing a handheld's ever really going to be able to do about that, which is why I think there's probably an even better chance for a Microsoft or a Sony to really spread the field here. But you have to give it up to two companies for really proving the course. And like on the power front, it's Valve with the Steam Deck, and people are willing to spend. And then, of course, Nintendo kind of really sticking with handhelds, because it was really, handhelds have been killed multiple times for different reasons. And I don't think anyone really, I don't want to say anyone, I never expected them to come back. But of course they make perfect sense. And on Sony's front, like, I think Portal is a very experimental device. I think the Portal's awesome. Like, I love the Portal. And during football season, I use it constantly. And so I can watch football and play a game at the same time. And they're finding, high engagement, later engagement, more money spent with just that device. And I think it's going to be a reinforcing principle for them to pursue. Tom and I were talking about this on Broken Silicon, where I was like, you can see a reality where PS6 comes out and there's a hardware like a console, and there's a handheld, and you can buy one or the other or both. And that's exciting, I think, in my opinion.
Do you miss the days when the handhelds actually had exclusive games made specifically for the device?
Yeah, that's probably my great Vita. I'm a famous lover of Vita specifically, and in fact, like, my studio was one of the last studios to ever release Vita games. We like held on until we literally could not do it anymore. Like, they literally wouldn't let us. And I loved it from the very beginning. People talk about the things I've gotten wrong. One of the major things I got wrong a long time ago is how I thought Vita was going to be huge, because I just thought it was awesome, and it was obviously the opposite of huge.
Even
so yeah, I miss those days.
It was really cool.
Yeah, it's a great little device. Like, I loved it, and I like the PSP too, but I think the Vita was really, really special. And I was a Game Boy kid and all the rest, so I like handheld gaming. And so I do miss those kinds of games. But we're in a situation now where, like, technological realities are we don't have to have these downports of games anymore, and these kind of optional lower versions of an Uncharted or a Killzone. You can just kind of have the same game. And I think that, like, it's nice to think that there would be a market for a Vita, but there wasn't a market for a Vita 10, 12 years ago, and so there's certainly not one now. But I think there could potentially be a market for a machine that allows you to seamlessly play between a PS6 on an 80-inch screen and a PS6 in your hands. And we were talking even on the show about, like, could you bundle things together? And it would be expensive, but could you try to sell them in a unit? Or could you try to convince people to go in one direction or the other? And I don't know. It's exciting. Like, I love handheld gaming, and I love the idea of it finally being at the power level of a console. So I do lament the missing handheld exclusives and those environments, like, because I grew up in them, but they don't really make any sense anymore.
Yeah. PS3 generation. Are you surprised that, like, they haven't done remasters of, say, Resistance or any of the games that are kind of stuck on that PS3 generation? Because we know, like, both these companies love to do remasters. I think Sony does a little bit more, but Xbox had a big success with Oblivion recently, although maybe you can argue that's a remake. But it definitely seems like there's games you could essentially make money off of that are still locked to the PS3 for whatever reasons. What do you think? Do you think we'll ever see a future where Resistance and Killzone come back so they remaster those games?
I hope so. I think that again, we were talking about this because it's a more hardware focused situation on Tom's podcast, but I was talking about this company called Implicit Conversions. They're the studio that do all the PS1, PS2, and PSP ports, and they have this thing called the Syrup engine, and they released a roadmap for it. And they have, like, this is what we're doing, this is kind of what we're working on, and this is, like, our wants and, like, the things we're working towards. And one of them was true PS3 emulation. But there's this idea that it really can't happen because of the way the cell processor was used, that games have to at best be ported one at a time, very laboriously. And it's disappointing because there are literal server farms of PS3s playing games through PlayStation Plus, because there is no native solution for them yet. There really are only probably 10 or 15 games at the most that really do need to come over. And it's disappointing to me that they haven't done them one at a time and just really put the work into making it happen. But there's a sign, I bring this all up because there's a sign that maybe something is happening with Resistance specifically, because they kind of quietly took Resistance, I guess all three of them, off of PlayStation Plus a couple months ago, and no one really knows why. And I was wondering, maybe it's potentially that they know people want more Resistance. It's a niche product still. Resistance 3 only sold about 2 million copies. But I feel like they know Resistance, that it's Resistance 1, 2, and 3, Killzone 2 and 3, and even Killzone 1, the PS3 port would come over, I would assume. Infamous 1 and Infamous 2, Ratchet and Clank, A Crack in Time, and maybe and there would be some other third-party ones or second-party ones that really don't need to come over anymore because of other ports. So, like, there's the Demon Souls remake, so that's kind of out. Metal Gear Solid 4 is going to be in the new collection, no doubt. So, maybe you want to get Heavenly Sword off of the machine and a few others. So it is my hope that they do it. Then you'd be able to really sell a machine like a PlayStation that really could play everything, and that would be nice. But for some reason, they just haven't done it. And I think people overestimate how well those games have done or will do. But I do think it would be a big deal to get, like, a Killzone trilogy or a Resistance trilogy. I would love that. I'm a big fan of both series.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why they, like, hey, let's do Last of Us or whatever, right? Constantly, but it was like, man, Killzone would be cool. I didn't play Killzone 2 or 3 or the Resistance games. So as someone, speaking of, like, what I would want, like, those are some of the ones that particularly would be interesting to me.
Hey, maybe they end up on Xbox someday.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something? What do you we talked about Naughty Dog and what happened with the Last of Us stuff, but do you think any of that has to do with, like, Neil writing and doing a lot of stuff for the Last of Us TV show? And what does it mean for him to actually leave the show now to go back to Naughty Dog to work on Intergalactic and all that stuff? Do Do you feel like he was forced out from the TV show? Do you feel like that was his own decision because like we got to ship this game? What do you think's going on with that?
No, I think he left on his own. Neil has an incredible amount of power at PlayStation. So it's not, they're not going to kick him off of his own IP show. I really believe, I haven't talked to him about it personally. And I typically don't speak to him about personal stuff anyway, because I just don't want to cross wires. But like my read on it from the outside is like, all right, Intergalactic is really shaping up. It's probably, I don't know, a couple of years out. I would like to think it was less than that, but probably not. And it's time to really focus in on getting this thing across the finish line. And he's also producing and maybe even executive producing their other game, which people hypothesize is, the Cassie Drake Uncharted game. I don't have any information on that. It's clear that game exists somewhere because they've teased it in live action trailers, but who knows who the hell's making it. And I thought Naughty Dog was done with Uncharted, but maybe not. So I think he probably just has his plate full. And I think one of the things that when I interviewed him last time, he said in so many words was like, I'm a game maker first. I mean, we were talking about kind of straddling the line and getting sucked into Hollywood and how legitimizing that is and how good that feels to win Emmys and how amazing that is and how serious people take it, even though he's way more accomplished in the game space. But people don't necessarily read it as serious. And I think that there's something alluring to that. But he was of the mind that like, I am a game maker and a designer and a writer of games first. And this was something that like I got to do and that it was a really fun thing to do, but that I will always end up going back to Naughty Dog. And he did. So I don't know. He has kids and things that going on in his life. So I don't assume to know like what different decisions he had to get through to get to that point. But I also, if I'm reading creatively, I would actually look at it the exact opposite, that and I don't know this, so I don't want anyone to pick this up because I don't know this, but it's like, I would argue that he might not be happy with the second season.
Mm-hmm. It just seemed like the ratings started to decline a little bit.
Well, the game, I thought the first season was very true. They obviously make a lot of changes, focus on different things, but it was really great. The second season, especially because I just did a replay of The Last of Us Part 2 leading up to it, so it was very much familiar in my mind. It just wasn't as powerful. But I also understand, as I said earlier, that 2/3 of audiences aren't familiar with the games and loved the show, like critically. So I don't want to be too harsh on it, but from my point of view, it wasn't nearly as successful as the first season. And maybe he feels the same way. I don't know. I don't know. So there's any number of reasons, but I really do think the simplest explanation is that he's directing a multi-$100 million. I mean, dude, The Last of Us Part 2 cost $220 million and it came out in 2020. Can you imagine how much Intergalactic costs?
Over 300 million easy.
Yeah,
I mean,
easily.
Battlefield 4 or 5, the new Battlefield's 400 million plus. I mean, I would imagine.
It's crazy how expensive that stuff's gotten, man.
So you gotta lock in, like you're responsible to that game and that studio first, and I think he knows that. And
I would make a bet. I would have bet that game's the launch title for PS6.
That would be
if it could be cross-gen, but you're probably looking at 2027. And who knows, like there could be a delay. You're looking at maybe 2028. I mean, that might be when PlayStation releases their next console. Because there's rumors about 2027, 2028. I mean, there's rumors being 2027. Rumors.
Yeah, that would suck. I would be so mad if they did it in 2027.
It's potentially maybe it's the next gen launch title with the cross gen stuff. I don't know, but we're going to be winding down here. Colin's been more than generous with his time. 3 hours is long enough. I mean, I know you do Sacred Symbols is like 5 hours sometimes.
Yeah, we get lost in the fucking weeds. And I mean, half of it is also about nothing. So
me and Jez, we do like a 4-hour show. So if anybody's got any questions, we'll get some fun questions and we'll get Colin out of here. Joaquin says that you've been reading Project Hail Mary.
I read it last summer.
Last summer. Okay, so did you see the new trailer?
I did see the trailer. Yeah, it looks cool. I'm a little more surprised that they didn't. I like Andy Weir. I like his books. Yes. All three of them are really good.
I've not read Artemis. I've read Martian and Project. When people, because I read a lot of books. I've read 50 books this year.
Oh wow!
I love reading so much. Right now I'm reading Authority. I don't know if it's a second book in the Southern Reach series, Area X.
No, I haven't read it. No.
But when people ask me for recommendations, it's like hard to give them like, oh, I don't want to give you a series because. But anytime someone asks me for a standalone book, I always recommend Project Hail Mary because that book was phenomenal.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's funny, man. Like I am a voracious reader, but only in the summer. So like I have like very seasonal rhythms. And in the spring and summer, we have a pool in our backyard, and I like to just float around in the pool and read. And then I just don't read the rest of the year. So I'll read like 10 or 15 books over the summer, and then I won't read again until the next April or May or when we open. Because I like just being outside. I like working in the yard and like gardening and doing all that kind of stuff. And then when the fall comes, it's like football, it's hockey, it's video games. It's like I'm really locked into all that sort of thing. So I'm just getting my reading legs back under me over the last couple of months for the first time this year. So I'm only like a few books in, and it's all nonfiction. But it's funny. You should read Artemis because I think Artemis would actually be the most compelling film, but it would be the hardest to do because it takes place on the moon, and a lot of it is based on like, you know, the low gravity, and it would just look weird. They wouldn't be able to do it. It just wouldn't be possible. So, but I think Project Hail Mary is interesting just because I would have liked to see it be a mini series. It's such a deep story. I don't know how you're going to do it in a couple hours. You're not going to be able to do it justice.
And they spoiled something pretty big at the end of that trailer too, which was, you know, when I read it the first time, I was like, what? But I guess like, you know, Hollywood, you're not going to be able to keep that secret, or you're going to have to market it somehow. Yeah. So what's on your reading list for the summer? What do you got planned?
So I have like a few. So I bought Dune, which I read in high school, maybe, or maybe even in college.
I read Dune in high school as well. Yeah, Dune,
but I don't think I really understood it, to be honest. I mean, when I go back and even when I play games from when I was a kid, like I remember playing Metal Gear Solid 3 for the first time since like right around after I got out of college. And I'm like, I don't think I even really understood this game, like when I played it, like what it was about or anything. So I bought Dune because the Dune films look so good, and I was like, you know, I really want to refamiliarize myself with this and maybe try to read it, give it a good college try before just dumping the movie into my brain and ruining it. So that's on my list. I'm pretty prodigious. Do you like nonfiction, or you just read fiction?
I usually read fiction. Science fiction, fantasy, horror, crime, thriller, mystery.
Cool.
Yeah, all
that's
that
like
stuff.
my wife. My wife reads all that. My wife loves reading classics too. Like she's reading a lot of like Russian literature.
Classics
now
too.
Like
I've recently read Count of Monte Cristo. You know, I've seen the movie, so I read Count of Monte Cristo, and talk about one of the best books I've ever read in my life. You know,
you guys are nerds, man.
Jez reads World of Warcraft novels.
Yeah. There are some Resistance novels you can read too. But I just ask because like a lot of it is nonfiction. Like I'm going piercing through back Team of Rivals, which is like a really seminal Civil War book about Abraham Lincoln's cabinet. So that's like a really good read.
That sounds really dry.
Oh, it's actually it's like pop history, so it would be dry, but it's by a woman named Doris Kearns Goodwin, who's like a famous historian. It actually won, I don't know like what the specific, it's on my nightstand. It won some prize, and it's quite a prodigious book. It's a very thick book, I will say, but more in the pop history realm as opposed to like the really dry history that I studied in college. So yeah, I went back in and messed around with that. And then what's sitting on my shelf, although I just don't even understand what the point is of going any further, is 2 summers ago, I started reading the Game of Thrones books. So I read the first 2. And then last summer I started the 3rd one, and then I kind of put it down because I ended up reading the 3-Body Problem instead.
I read that too. What'd you think of 3-Body Problem?
It was I thought it was really good. I think it's a little, I don't want to spoil it too much, but the game stuff in it.
Yes.
Like I'm not crazy about, like I'm more crazy about like the idea of the 3-body problem, and this I don't want to even
the
say
ideas the ideas in that book are so good. Like the characterizations of the people, I don't care, like whatever. It's like the ideas in that book are just like they make you ruminate and think about stuff. Did you read like The Dark Forest, or did you read,
so The Dark Forest is that I got a I guess it's a trilogy, or it was a trilogy.
Yes,
so I bought the trilogy on Amazon, and I have to read the 2nd and 3rd one. So those are also.
Dark Forest is so much better than 3-Body Problem. If you haven't read that one yet,
and I know what I actually learned. I think it might have even been Rand. How I found out about the books was because the Dark Forest hypothesis is a thing that's named after the book in science, which is the idea that all alien species know better than to make themselves known.
Absolutely. Yep.
And that's why you don't see any of them, because like the ones that are loud are like and annoying and setting off nuclear bombs, and radio signals like us were like, look at us, and then we're gonna get fucking killed. So that's what I think even drew me into those books. The one fascinating, this is so nerdy, but the beginning of the Three Body Problem in English starts with like a communist struggle session, because the book primarily takes place in China for people that don't know, and it's written by a Chinese author, and he actually is, I think, a member of the Communist Party. But there's like a struggle session in the beginning of it, and he gave an interview where he was saying in the Chinese version they put the struggle session as a flashback in the middle of the book because they were afraid the censors would get mad. And then when they released it in the West, they were able to put it in the order that they wanted to, which I thought was pretty cool. So it starts with this pretty anti-communistic.
Yes, it does.
Thing, yeah.
But you need to read the Dark, because I read them both back to back, and I was like, Three Body Problem's great, but Dark Forest is so much better. It's so much better.
And then you know what I got really into? Oh, I'm sorry. Go.
I was just gonna say, like, I read some Goosebumps books when I was in school.
just hates this when I start talking books on the podcast.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be.
No, when I have games is my one love, games is my one love, and reading is my other love. So it's like I like to when I talk about both. So it's not often. I also get to talk to somebody who likes reading as much as I do, especially someone who's read like some of the books I have too. So
I'm just kidding. It's fun listening to people that are passionate about things. I just don't have the attention span, man. Maybe if they got pictures and shit, like, you know, manga and stuff, then that's cool.
There's the right kind of book though, like, because sometimes I do get a little bored or distracted. But then like the Project Hail Mary is one of those books where like I couldn't put it down. Where I was like, this is really riveting stuff. But again, like I was saying, Jez, I'm somewhat like you, where in a normal environment, like I don't read unless literally I'm floating in the pool. Like that is when I read. And my wife makes fun of me because all my books are like, I have like, you know, shelves of books, but they're all like water damaged, you know, from like my wet fingers and all the rest. Yeah. But that's like where I was gonna say, you know what else I went on a trip for? I always loved The Road, Cormac McCarthy's The Road. That was like a great book, but I never read any of his other books. So I read like Blood Meridian and No Country for Old Men, and also I must say Blood Meridian was really hard to understand for me. It was like the one book where I was like, shit, I don't even really know what the fuck they're talking about. And I had to like read it chapter by chapter, and then I was like going on a Cliff's Notes website to see if I understood what was being said. No Country for Old Men was much more understandable, and so
I have a couple Cormac McCarthy books. I have not read any of them yet. I did look at The Road, and he has this weird writing style where the dialogue's not presented as like dialogue as you would normally.
Yeah, he doesn't use like punctuation and stuff.
Yeah, which is like, you know, when you read all these books, it's like my mind's like searching out the quotes. But I always planned on reading that stuff. We do got a couple questions here from Face, who's a big PlayStation fan, but he supports the podcast. He wants to know what happened to Bruce Stanley or Bruce Staley.
Oh, Staley. Yeah, I thought he went away obviously after The Last of Us. He ended up somewhere though, didn't he?
I don't know.
I do know that there's like a lot of consternation on whether he gets his credit. I'm just looking at Moby Games to see if he even pops up anywhere. Bruce
Staley is now at a company called Wildflower Entertainment.
You're right. I thought I saw something recently. So yeah, he's working on something. But yeah, he kind of I don't know what happened. Like it seems weird, right? It's very similar to the Amy Hennig situation.
They created the studio, so he's a co-founder of Wallflower Interactive, fully remote studio.
Bruce Straley. Oh, there it is. Bruce Straley. I was like, why can't I find his Moby Games page? Yeah, has he popped up on anything? Yeah, so he hasn't really popped up in anything except for like special thanks.
Yeah.
His last directorial, like Uncharted 4 would be the last thing he released, I guess.
Yeah, it's Amy Hennig's finally going to be able to release the game. Seems like forever since she's actually.
I know, it's too bad, man. She's great.
And Jade Raymond, who knows when Jade Raymond's ever going to release anything?
Jade, I think it's fairly clear that she doesn't. I don't know, man. These are people, you don't want to be too mean to them, but it's like, do you know what you're doing? Or like, did you luck into Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs? Because like, everywhere you go doesn't seem to work out very well. Like she founded Motive, left long before they ever released a game.
Yeah.
The whole Google Stadia thing, that thing imploded, and now she's with Haven, and they're all fucking up. I mean, who knows? She's also a producer. She's not like a creative, so I think she probably gets too much blame in some sense.
What do you think ends up happening with Fair Games? I mean, I know there's a lot of people saying, "Hey, it's going to get canceled." Or it's going to get concorded. Like, do you still think it comes out probably next year, some point in time?
Yeah, like I said, like they did a remote. So I talked to someone that did an invite remote session or a series of sessions with the game that they were calling Project Hearts. And I think what the person told me was they wouldn't acknowledge that it was Fair Games, but like it even, I think on the load screens it said Fair Games. So so like they didn't really, and I think they were supposed to give feedback or whatever. But I'm trying to remember, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I think what the person was saying was that it's like a very confused game that has like a lot of different elements in it that aren't really cohesive or working. I actually think the idea of the game is kind of cool, like the anti-rich go like rob their mansions, extract whatever kind of thing. It's not it's not a game for me, but you know, I can see beyond my own myopic views of games. But I just think it's got that Ubisoft style. It looks, at least from what we saw of it publicly, looks very played out. And it just from that one person, I don't know how other people that played it felt about it, but that one person that wrote me about it, and a reliable source, and was not impressed. And I'm not surprised, to be honest. I mean, it's going to be really hard to make a good multiplayer game, and it's going to be hard to know what works. I mean, what's really weird, do you guys know the game, what was it called? Midnight Murder Club?
Yes, you know, Sony published it, and like they've never talked about it since. It doesn't have any reviews.
Yeah, they like never acknowledged it basically, and and to me, I'm like, that actually sounds like a kind of cool idea. Like, why are you, I didn't play it, but Dustin did, and he really liked it, and I'm like, why are you not even acknowledging this game? And then you're going hard, and you're even publishing it and like putting out updates for it. I have no idea what the fuck they're doing. But Fair Games, I think Fair Games will come out, but I just if it doesn't, then they bought that team, you know.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Firewalk, though, and that's another thing of how you know they believed in Concord, is that they bought them. They didn't have to do that. They bought them a year before the game came out. And people were like, oh, no, they never believed in it. They never spent any money. And I'm like, they bought the team when the game was basically in alpha state and ready to go, and they were polishing it. Like, so I don't necessarily believe in their taste, let's say. But we'll see.
Yeah. Pat Rock says, what do you think draws more revenue and has better returns for Microsoft, the annual Call of Duty or Game Pass?
Draws more revenue, Game Pass. Returns, probably also Game Pass, because I imagine we know, I don't know the numbers now. I don't even know if they split them up, but the year that they bought Activision, I think Activision was only making $2 billion in cumulative profit for their fiscal year on all of their games. So if you assume that that's true for Call of Duty, then that would probably be in the hundreds of millions.
And that includes World of Warcraft as well, and Candy Crush.
Right. Like, and by the way, that Warcraft, I never played World of Warcraft, but that cutscene that was going around recently was making me laugh. You know what I'm talking about? That everyone's making fun of?
Oh god, no, we don't.
It was so funny. I didn't know what was funny about it at first. I'm like, oh, it's a game from 2005. Like, this is the way it looked. And then I like went and looked at another cutscene, and I'm like, oh, that's what's funny about it. I actually thought it was like a story thing that people were making fun of at first that I just didn't understand.
No, I mean, it was a bit of both, but it was like with that cutscene, that content patch was like a mid-season mini patch, right? Where it's just something to reduce churn, like maybe like half an hour worth of extra story, bits like that. But like that cutscene was spectacularly low budget. Like they've released some more cutscenes that are like fully motion captured for the upcoming season, which look orders of magnitude better. But yeah, like WoW does that kind of thing all the time, where it's like there's a mid-season patch with really low quality stuff, and then like the higher quality stuff comes later. But that one just went viral for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, but, I'm sorry, that was a distraction. But yeah, so I just think based on those numbers, I can't imagine they've gotten much better, because they've probably gotten somewhat consumed by Game Pass. So I would assume Game Pass cumulatively makes more money yearly than Call of Duty does. I mean, it just makes more revenue.
Yeah, that speaks to how expensive Call of Duty is, right? And I think like it's like we talked about earlier about PlayStation being precarious. I think that's why some people, you know, when you think about the health of the platform in terms of its, you know, longevity, like putting Call of Duty Day One in Game Pass is probably disruptive to Call of Duty's business model. And
absolutely,
that's probably why they removed it from.
It's for the future gains, right? Like, so
it's probably why they removed Day One games from the standard tier of Game Pass in the first place.
Which is going to be odd because if they're trying to move everybody from, because I think most of the console users have Game Pass Ultimate, right? Because that's where the day one games are, and it also has multiplayer access. But if you're trying to transition the users to PC, PC Game Pass is much cheaper.
I think so, like, that's the next thing we see happen, Rand. That's the next thing we see happen is PC Game Pass price going up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense, because if you're trying to transition the PC, then they don't need the console version of Game Pass. And that's one of the other things when you look at that machine we talked about earlier of like, here's a console that can play the Xbox games, but also Steam. But if I buy a multiplayer game via Steam, I can play it without multiplayer access. But if I buy the Xbox version, I'm going to have to be subbed to some form of Game Pass to be able to play it. Does that make sense on the same device? So it's like, are they going to have to give up what used to be Xbox Live Gold specifically for that device? You know what I mean? Like, there's, but you're right. They're probably going to have to. But then, is growth going to slow down on the PC side, PC Game Pass side, which is something they always talk about how they're growing there. But it's like, yeah, it's like $12, and on the console side, it's 20. So, like, what do you do in that situation if you're going to try to move everybody over there? Lou Bego wants to know if we can still expect a PS6, because there are some people saying that like there's not going to be. But I would imagine.
No, yeah, they'll definitely be. They're making PlayStation 6 games. Yeah, I mean,
I would imagine there's going to be a PS6, a PS7, and then after that,
yeah, I mean,
probably foggy.
I think there'll definitely be. There is a PlayStation 6. The future beyond that, I guess, is really unknowable. I would assume Sony wants. Again, Sony's so reliant on a hardware ecosystem that they're going to let it go very reluctantly. And I also think, PS5 sales are really brisk. I mean, people want to play on it still, and they want to spend money, and they're spending more money than ever on it. So it could be that there's like a really more of a hesitance to move off of gaming hardware than we even realize. And that benefits Sony and Nintendo. So yeah, there'll be a PS6. I just hope it doesn't come out till 2028 at the earliest, but I don't know.
I guess this last question. Ask Colin if he thinks flagship Sony games like Bloodborne, Stellar Blade, Days Gone, Gravity Rush, etc. coming to Xbox would be a better fit or be better to profit for Sony than their flagship games, presumably like God of War, Spider-Man, and stuff like that.
Because earlier we were talking about how, putting God of War on Xbox could, degrade Sony's value proposition. But what if some of those sort of second party-ish kind of games or smaller games like Days Gone? Stellar Blade is a second party game. As far as Bloodborne,
yeah, Stellar Blade, Stellar Blade, I wouldn't be surprised if it did. They obviously want. I think it's coming to Switch 2 next. I think that's fairly obvious, actually, because the studio head gave his entire team Switch 2s. And they did that with PS5 when they launched on Stellar Blade on PS5. So I think that's coming soon. Bloodborne, I don't think so, just because I think that game is so. They need to do something with it. Obviously, it's stuck in some sort of contractual stasis with From Software and probably first rights of refusal, and that's why the game's not even been updated. Days Gone. I think Sony would have made different decisions with Days Gone probably if they knew it's long tail sales. It has really good long tail sales. Gravity Rush is getting its own movie soon, so there might be a reason. I just think it's what I was saying earlier about the Bandai Namco license is I think you want to play in the small sandbox first and see if anyone gives a shit about anything smaller, or if it and how people take to Freedom Wars or Everybody's Golf and all of the rest, and that those games aren't coming over, and that Sony is, I think, being explicitly exclusionary with them just says to me that I think they want to keep most of their games close to their chest, and where games can benefit from a wide user base to keep it alive, I think you'll see more of those games. So the thing I think you'll see is, and we were bringing up Fair Games earlier again, is I wouldn't be surprised if Fair Games just came to Xbox right away. I mean, that in fact might be the best play. But what we were saying earlier too is that like the longer this goes on, and if there's Steam integration and all the rest, Sony can just wait the clock out. So, and I think that's going to become more of a reality, and I think that they know more about the situation now than they did even when they probably greenlit Helldivers. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Last question. Most anticipated game for the rest of the year. What are you looking forward to?
Most anticipated? My honest answer is Power Wash Simulator 2.
Okay.
I love Power Wash Simulator. I've played it for more than 100 hours. It's like a little addiction of mine. I just download the DLC. I'm not even familiar with like half the things like that they're based on. I'm just I got to clean everything. And I even bought my own power washer, and I've power washed like every square inch of my yard at this point. So Yeah, so the honest answer is Power Wash Simulator 2. I'm like super excited about. Actually, though, a game comes out tomorrow from when we're recording on console. It's already out on PC that I'm really looking forward to, which is System Shock 2 Remastered.
I never played those.
I never did either. I'm a huge BioShock fan. And I went back and played System Shock Remake just last year, or maybe 2 years ago, and I loved it. I thought it was phenomenal. Like, I was like, wow, this is so good. And you really understand where BioShock comes from once you play it. And System Shock 2 is supposed to be like the one. So that's the one that Ken Levine wrote and everything. So I'm really excited to play that. Ghost of Yotei is I'm not a huge Ghost of Tsushima. I think Ghost of Tsushima is really good. I'm kind of tired of the Chinese or Japanese historical flavored samurai sword, like Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Japanese, whatever, like, and I know China and Japan and Korea and Vietnam and Laos and all these places are distinct. I just think it's all kind of coming into this one Musou like genre of aesthetic where I'm just like, I'm not that excited about it, but I'm going to play that. But yeah, I'm really like most looking forward to Power Wash Simulator too. And I play a lot of old games. So I'm always trying to catch up on things. Like, I still have to play Doom: The Dark Ages as well. That came out, I bought it, but I haven't played it yet.
It was fun. I liked Eternal more, but it was fun.
Yeah, I still think I like 2016, I think, more than Eternal, but I replayed both of them earlier in the year. I platinumed 2016. I didn't want to platinum Eternal because I didn't want to play it online. And then Hell Is Us looks really cool.
Yeah, it does. It does look cool.
Gears. I'll play Gears. My wife's a big Gears fan. I'm also a big fan of the Gears trilogy, the original trilogy, so I'll play that.
I have no interest in playing Gears again. I've played that game so many times. I don't care. I have zero interest.
Yeah,
so what's funny? I said that was the last question, but I actually thought of another question that's kind of relevant. So this is kind of a serious question, and I swear we'll get you out after this because you've been more than generous with your time.
No, it's all good.
You, over the years, have been a big proponent of game prices. You basically have been saying games are too cheap.
Yeah.
Right. And so when they finally made the price jump to 70, you were on board. Now, with Nintendo doing 80, with Mario Kart and Xbox doing 80 with Outer Worlds 2, which both me and Jess says there's no way to do with Outer Worlds 2. That's for Call of Duty. And we were wrong because I was just like, Outer Worlds 2 doesn't seem like the game to do that with, but whatever. And then with GTA 6 on the horizon, which probably seems like 100, if not more, because right now it seems like nobody else has adopted $80 price point. I wonder if there's a lot of wait and see to see, because it did seem like Randy Pitchford was implying that Borderlands 4 was going to be 80 until then he was like, no, it's 70. So what do you think about the future of game prices? Do you think there's companies still on a wait and see approach to see if there's any backlash? And what do you expect GTA 6 to launch at, I guess?
Yeah, GTA 6, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a high, like you were saying, up to $99.99. Probably $80, I think, would be a safe bet for GTA 6. I don't know if you want to push it too much, but that is the one game that I think could really ask for whatever and probably be largely unaffected. It's hard to know how an $80, well, Mario Kart was $80, right? And
yeah.
But it's hard to know like how that really affects anything because I think a lot of them were bundled, and I think at that point you got it for $50. My wife can only get the Switch 2 loose or whatever, so she had to get the game separately, and I know she paid $80 for it, and I think she's gotten a lot of play out of it. I think one of the major things that will help bend the arc of economics is continuing to communicate to players that you kind of get what you pay for, and this idea of racing to the bottom is only going to destroy the industry and reduce us to playing fewer and fewer games. Newer games or just going back to older games. I understand that people are price constrained, and I live a very fortunate life. I can afford any of the games I want, and I know that that's not a situation that a lot of people are in. So I try to be mindful of that. But I think if we want to stem the tide of like an erosion of the value of games to us for hours spent and immersion and experience, then we have to understand that we have to kind of pay for those things. And I just think games are artificially cheap. Now, you should play on the market and get as cheap as you can and find an angle. Look at how well it did for a game like Expedition 33 to sell at $50. I think that made it really attractive. So you want to play the market. But I also think that like there needs to be a better communication that you're getting sometimes 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 hours out of these games. Like, how cheap do you want them to be? Like, what is your expectation of price? Why are you okay going to a movie getting a popcorn and a Coke and a ticket, paying $25 and sitting there for 2 hours, but you have a real problem with sitting with a game for 20 that you paid $50 for. It doesn't make sense. And I just don't get it. Like, I don't know why people don't understand that games are not an altruistic exercise, and there needs to be a this is why people say, like, why do you care how these things work? It's because, like, you need to have a virtuous cycle of money made, or these things all go away. So I just think it's important. It's what I always say. Like, it's important for me to buy the games that I care about. That's all I can do, and that's what I do. Everyone else has to kind of behave economically the way they want to too. But understand that people might be tired of hearing it, but nonetheless, I paid $80 for Final Fantasy 3/6 on SNES in 1994. So, you know, Phantasy Star 4 was $100 when it came to Genesis. So we're getting games for and this was 30 years ago, unadjusted. So the idea that games are expensive is simply not true. Now, other economic things could be true, like inflation's really bad, cost of living isn't keeping up, people have shitty jobs and they're unemployed, and all that's true. But nonetheless, also the games are cheaper than they have ever been, and we're getting more value out of them than we ever have. And I think it's worth talking about. It's very unpopular, though. I get it.
It is an unpopular opinion because people don't want to pay the same. People don't want to pay more for the same things they've been getting. And you could make the argument that, like, this gen started out at 70. It's like, do we even really see the improvements or that you would have from 60 to 70, and now you want to raise it from 70 to 80, but the games don't really seem to warrant that price increase, right?
Yeah,
so it's
I get that. I get that.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's I was kind of, well, not that Nintendo, Microsoft done it. Surely EA and Ubisoft and all these other companies will, and they haven't. So I sort of wonder if they're in a wait and see approach, and maybe they'll think about it next year, you know, or what have you. But Lubu's got a statement. He's got a question, but I'm just going to read the statement. He's like, how do we have more of this really respectful and insightful dialogue amongst different gaming communities? Because this was fantastic, and so to counter all the other BS that we've seen play out in our own silos. Kudos to all three of you. Love your POV on it, though. Well, I mean, I think everybody should be respectful. I'm not looking to bait anybody. I just want to have a conversation with smart people about gaming, whether it's Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, or what have you. I think it's interesting conversation, personally.
I think the issue is, like, ultimately just how the internet works. When it all revolves around clicks, and the things that get the most clicks is drama. And, you know, I often see, like, some of these, like, really big YouTubers now. It just feels like they manufacture beef because they know it's gonna lead to, you know, clicks and the responses and stuff like that. See, like, some of these really, really, really prolific YouTubers just wading into these conflicts. It feels like almost on purpose, because it's like, you know, creates a reality TV almost kind of cycle, right? I think, like, this is just my perspective, but I think, like, if you really like that kind of content, which is more like normal and human, with people actually, like, having a respectful discussion about something, there is content out there. You just, I suppose, kind of just got to find it and try and cut through the noise. Like, this is where, like, recommending stuff to your friends and sharing things that you enjoy, hitting the like button on content that you like, really, really helps. Because, you know, someone who works in publishing, and also, you know, Colin, you worked at IGN as well. I know exactly the kind of content that people click on, the kind of titles that people click on. And, like, it's hard to push against that tide of, like, clickbait, quote unquote, when you've got, like, higher ups, at least in our business, being like, you know, we need more of these kind of articles and these kind of titles, you know, because this is what people click on, and therefore this is what people want, you know. I think it's an unhealthy want. You know, I think things like TikTok and the algorithmic addictive short form video is, like, what people click on, but I think it's an unhealthy kind of thing. And I think that works too for content that is a little bit more, you know, hateful and negative and stuff like that. So I think my response would be to share the stuff, you know, if whether it's Last Stand Media or us or other shows like Xbox Era and stuff like that. All that stuff that I think does represent, you know, at least reasonable, fun discussions that aren't just banking on negativity. Just try and share it as much as you can. I think that's how you get more of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I appreciate it, and I think that last stand, like, I don't want to pimp my own stuff. I usually don't do that when I go on these things, but I think we do have those kinds of conversations all the time for many years. People are mega abusive to me online, and I think you have to. This is what I was saying to you guys earlier. Is like, it's cool to have fun and make your bets and stake your claims and live by the sword, die by the sword, and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, I just choose not to really participate in my own abuse. You can't really win when you're dealing with people like that, and so just having the conversations that you want to have, nonetheless, you'll find like-minded people that also want to have those conversations. And so I think just doing it is in and of itself like a movement towards making things better. But I agree with you, Jez. Like, there is an appetite for it. Like, there are a lot of people in the industry that they're not in the industry. They're really like barnacles. They're not really in it, no offense, but like that make content about other people's content, that make content about other people's opinions. It's like, I make content about my opinions. I make content about the content that we cover. I don't need to make content about other people's opinions, other people's content, what other people said, what other people got right, what other people got wrong. What do I care? Like, I think people are too, you become a one note kind of creator when that's what you do. And then people come to you for that. And then when you try to speak about games, I see this all the time with people that are abusive to me. Is like, you go look at their stuff and they might have quite a few views on things that they're making fun of other people about, or taking the piss out of someone or something. But when they're like, all right, let's have an earnest conversation about X, like, no one gives a shit. It's because no one comes to you for that. And so you have to keep doing what you're doing because that's the only way you're going to get attention. But I never needed to do that to get attention, and I won't do that. I am snarky in general sometimes, and I'm confident in what I say. But if you look at like my podcast and certainly my social media feeds and stuff, I'm not abusive to people. I don't take it out on people. I don't go after people. Like, it's not the way I've carried myself, and it's because I want to have conversations like this. So I'm glad that it resonates with people, and there are lots of people that are having conversations like this. You just need to cut through the noise of social media. We have a lot of tourists on social media, a lot of people that don't, they hide their trophies, they hide their achievements, they don't play games, they don't interact with it. They don't interact with the industry in any way but to be a barnacle and a drag on it. And they know exactly who they are. They're worthless to the industry. And those are the people you see are loudest about other people that create content about the games.
Completely agree.
Well, with that said, I think that's a good endpoint to the show. I want to thank Colin for coming on the show, and man, like 3.5 hours, which is way more than I thought, but there's so many cool things to talk about in the gaming industry. So
thank
we
you so
appreciate
much,
you.
dude.
And I'm sure, everybody knows where you're at, but if you want to tell people where they can check you out at, go right ahead.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to talk to you guys always. I find these conversations to be very high level and really instructive, and good to sharpen and challenge my own arguments as well, which I think just makes my own content better. So I'm always appreciative of these opportunities. People can find me on Sacred Symbols and Sacred Symbols Plus. We're on Patreon. If you're into you should listen to the content, obviously free first, and see if you like it. But we're there. And we have a YouTube. We're an audio podcast, but we do YouTube with video as well for those that like YouTube. And I'm trying to be more on social media. Like, I don't want to say I got chased off of social media, but I found the negativity to be so overwhelming that, like, no matter what you say, you just get attacked. And then I was just like, you know what? I can't control other people. I can only control myself. So I'm trying to be a little more active. So Long Island Viper on Twitter or X, if you want to find me there. And yeah, guys, I appreciate it. I hope everything's well in your worlds, and staying cool and playing games and all the rest. And I hope to come back soon.
All right. Jez, take us home.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who tuned in. You can find us patreon.com/XB2. For those who's listening later on Spotify, this show went out on July the 10th, 2025. And yeah, keep it gaming, as Rand says.
Yep.
And we'll see you guys in the next one. And thank you, Colin, so much for joining us this week.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.